What's up, everyone? How are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Deku story. What if Deku has black wings? If you enjoy, then please like, share, and do comments. There is a realm beyond mortal sight, one home to the most ethereal of beings. It is this land, this sacred haven, that mortals on that accursed earth refer to as heaven. It is a realm untouched by the hands of sin, its holy light shining in even the darkest of corners. Yet for centuries, there have been many fearful whispers to echo throughout the gleaming corridors, voices carrying the relics of a prophecy thought to be long forgotten. Rumors of the enigma, the Deku, as the others call him, circulate with infamy, angels sullying the poor boy's name without so much as a second thought. He may be an angel, but he was created from something unnatural, something vile and unholy. From his curly black hair to his dull, vanta-black eyes with their swirling specks of gold, he was an abomination in every sense of the word. He was ungodly in a realm ruled by God himself. His mere presence in this holy land was blasphemous, a profane intrusion challenging the divine order established by God himself. His true origin was a closely guarded secret, and none of the other angels were privy to the knowledge of how he came to be. The only thing they knew for certain was that he was born of destruction and darkness, chaos and desolation. No one in the heavenly realm dared to so much as stand in the boy's presence. He is a sinner, nothing more. That was why on this day, the day everyone had been hailing as the day of sanctification, that vile Deku was to be cast from heaven in front of everyone, much to the relief of the vengeful angels watching the display before them. Praise be to our Lord, for the unsightly Deku will never see the brilliant light of heaven again. Someone in the stands shouted in triumph. Deku would never again feel God's warmth shine upon him, let alone stand in the realm ruled by the man himself. Everyone prayed for the elders to hold firm in their decisions regarding the abhorrent creature. Cheers could be heard throughout the entire realm as the thing stood with its back to the crowd of jeering angels. The boy grit his teeth at the mocking voices telling him to get it over with and jump already. He could hear some screaming for the elders to cut his wings off and let him drop, and he rolled his eyes at the notion. My wings would just grow back, you cretins, he thought bitterly. Not like it hasn't already been tried and tested. Tuning out the boisterous crowd, he turned and plucked a feather from one of his wings. The black and gold speckled feather turned into a wispy vestige and transformed as he summoned his bow. The crowd silenced as he drew the shadowy string back, giving a smile as an arrow formed. The crowd gasped, making his smile stretch wider. He unfurled his massive black wings and released the arrow with a loud snap. Before dropping backwards from the bridge, the crowd panicked and scattered as the arrow was caught by a guarding angel, who apparently wasn't too well informed on heaven's most problematic child. Run! Someone shouted to the guard, but it was already too late. As soon as the arrow was caught, it fizzled from existence and a small black hole opened up in its place. The guard panicked, trying to fly away, all to no avail. He would have been Edin had God not snapped his fingers and rightened Izuku's little goodbye present. If there was one thing anyone knew, it was not to fuck with the Deku if God wasn't within the vicinity. There was always hell to pay when that little demon was up and running amok. The crowd quietened after realizing what God had done. The screaming and frantic flying had stopped, and the angels looked at one another for a moment before hollers of praise erupted from the crowd. Finally, someone shouted, "Good riddance!" Another joined in, and "Don't ever come back." There were cheers as everyone realized that wretched Deku's final attack would have no lasting damage for once. The only person who didn't look happy was God himself. The large visage of a giant man sighed, not taking his eyes off the spot his young angel had just leapt from. "I wish you luck, my angel of the void." Izuku sped through the rift between realms, his wings useless as he fell to earth. While he plummeted towards the clouds, he thought about how anticlimactic everything had been. Sure, he'd fired an arrow from one of his void weapons, but he knew it would do no real harm. I mean, come on. God was sitting right there, after all, he thought to himself as red tears gathered in his eyes from the wind. He closed them against the flowing torrent of the atmosphere and covered his face with an arm, all while trying in vain to get his wings to work properly. Maybe this is a good thing, anyway. None of the angels had ever liked Izuku. He'd been an anomaly since the day he was created. He was different and would therefore be hated for it for all of eternity. Because while all the other angels had white, straight hair, Izuku's was black and curly. While all the other angels had white and golden eyes with no separation in the pupils, Izuku's were Vanta-black, with golden flecks that danced and spun when he felt strong emotions. While all the other angels had white and gold wings, Izuku's were black with bright golden specks that shimmered at the tips. And while all the other angels were loved by God, Izuku was hated. Not only by God himself, but by everyone. He'd always been an outcast. None of the other angels had ever talked to him aside from when he was causing havoc. When they did speak to him, it was to cuss him out, always calling him names like unholy, demon, and his least favorite, Deku, among many other things. Deku was the name he'd been called for as long as he could remember, the name he had always hated and despised. No one called him that to his face unless God was around to do damage control, though. He smiled to himself at the thought, despite the freezing wind sending pinpricks of pain throughout his body. His smile fell when he realized he'd never again step foot in the heavenly plane, that he was as good as dead by that point. Frowning under the arm shielding his face, Izuku thought that he shouldn't, care less by that point, or at least, he tried to convince himself that he couldn't. They may hate him, but he despised them. From the name-calling to the experiments and torture done by the elders all in the name of righteousness, each of them could go die in the demon realm for all he cared. Yeah, this is definitely a good thing. And would it be too much to ask that he turns into a mortal and dies from his fall to earth? Probably. He uncovered his face and opened his stinging eyes in time to see he was closing in on the ground. With his enhanced vision, he could see a pair of mortals directly below him sitting outside a large house. He prayed for the last time, thank you very much, that he didn't crush them as he once again squeezed his eyes shut, desperately trying to get his wings to just fucking cooperate. After another moment of falling, he heard the people shouting something, but he couldn't make out what the tumultuous clamor of voices was about. Before he even had a chance to decipher what they were yelling about, he violently crashed into the ground. He heard the sickening snap and squelch of bones snapping and flesh flying as he landed, and after a beat of stunned silence, someone screamed. That was the last thing he heard as his mind caught up with his body and his nerves exploded in a world of pain. He surrendered to the agony that surged through him and let the darkness clouding his vision take over as he lost consciousness. Izuku doesn't care what. All I'm saying is that you and Hisashi would make amazing fathers, Nimuri told Shouta matter-of-factly as she sipped on her drink. She looked towards the rising sun as the man sitting beside her on the porch groaned. Shouta had to fight the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose. Goddammit, we've been over this already. It's not about whether or not we'd be good at it, Nimuri. Did you hear a word of what Hisashi has been saying? His face turned sour as he recalled some of the fights he and his husband had gotten into over the past few months. My sleep schedule is messed up enough as it is, and he wants to adopt a baby. A crying, fussing baby. Do you know what kind of hell on earth that would be for me? Think about how much worse off my sleep schedule would be then. Nimuri paused, narrowing her eyes thoughtfully. Then why don't you meet in the middle, adopt an older kid, 6 or 7, hell maybe even 8 or 9? She glanced towards Shouta, but he refused to meet her gaze. The whole thing was, quite frankly, ridiculous if you asked him. Nimuri, we have so little time on our hands as it is. Why would I want to waste what precious time I do have looking after some more than likely traumatized orphan? He grumbled, voice rough. Nimuri frowned and considered his words for a moment. But you know how badly Hisashi wants this, Shu. Even if it's not a baby, you should at least look into it. Nimuri fidgeted with the straw in her sparkling lemon water as she spoke. She didn't know what to say to convince him. If Hisashi, the love of his life, couldn't, how on earth would she? Listen, I know you're just trying to help. I understand that. But I get enough of this from Hisashi, along with the incessant nagging from everyone else in my immediate family. He paused and let out a huff. I've probably heard enough of this from just about everyone, actually, he muttered. At this point, the only way I'd ever adopt a child is if God himself asked me to. And seeing as to how I don't believe in all that shit, it's not going to happen. Nimuri's shoulders slumped at his words. She knew it was probably a lost cause by this point, but she continued regardless. So, if, say, God came to you in a dream, she muttered to herself. Shouta groaned and finally turned in his chair to face her. You are not sneaking Mako into my house and having her influence my dreams again. I'm already traumatized enough from when you forced her to make me dream about waking up in my bed as a cat. Nimuri chuckled, remembering a few of the spectacular phrases muttered by Shouta during that particular prank. Mako and her dream-controlling quirk were a godsend. Nimuri's face then morphed into something more serious as she said, I just wish you'd at least consider the possibility. Shouta's eyes narrowed into slits. Can we please just talk about something else? He asked. His voice was as monotone as ever, but there was a hint of desperation Nimuri had only heard a handful of times before. Nimuri was silent for a moment, debating on whether or not she should continue torturing him or if she should just drop it. With a steely determination for Izashi's sake, she opened her mouth and prepared to continue on her tirade to make one of her best friend's dreams finally become a reality. Before she could speak, however, her thoughts were cut off by a loud whistling sound. She and Shouta glanced at one another, bewildered, before they both looked around. Seeing nothing within their general vicinity, both pairs of eyes turned skywards where they locked on to the bright golden light that was hurtling towards them at high speed. Holy shit! Nimuri cried. What the hell is that? Shouta would have liked to know as well, but he didn't have a clue. They stepped away from the porch, rushing towards the door. But before they could enter the house, Nimuri had frozen, because as the object got closer, she recognized it as a person. Shouta, wait! She hollered, grabbing his arm. Shouta froze, his hand still clutching the handle of the porch's sliding glass door. We need to get inside, Nimuri, now! Shouta barked. The dark-haired woman shook her head frantically. She didn't know what to do, how she could stop this person from smashing into the ground at such high speed. Surely it will kill them, she thought. It's a person. She ran down the steps, watching as the person with large black wings got closer and closer to the ground. What are you doing? Shouta shouted, rushing after her. He grabbed her around the middle and held her in his arms, preventing her from getting any closer to where the person would crash land. We have to help them, she cried. They were both at a loss for what to do. The person was hurtling closer and closer to the ground with every second. The pair could see them desperately trying to gain control of what appeared to be two black wings, which were bigger than the person was long, may Shouta add. However, it was clear to see that they were failing. Shit, Shouta cursed. Nimuri, there's nothing we can do. They're trying to gain control of their flight. All we can manage is to hope they succeed. He began to haul her up the steps as she fought in his grip. She couldn't just sit by and do nothing. That person would die. There had to be something, anything she could do. Searching her surroundings, Nimuri sought a possible object to break the person's fall. However, even if there had been something convenient lying around, it most likely wouldn't have helped much with the speed at which they were plummeting. What are you doing? Shouta shouted. She turned away from the falling person to look at him heatedly. He returned her gaze with worry. What are you going to do, catch them? He asked incredulously. No, but there's gotta be something we can do. Nimuri quickly looked back to the person with the wing quirk, just in time to see them hit the ground. She froze in shock. After a beat, she let out an ear-piercing scream as blood and flesh shot into the air and coated both people standing close by. No, she cried out. The person, who was now a bloodied, split-open mess on the ground, was most definitely dead. Bones and gore painted the crater where he'd fallen, the person a heap of splattered flesh and shattered bones. The sight was nausea-inducing, but Nimuri couldn't tear her eyes away. Holy shit, she muttered. Shouta took one look at the broken, crumpled corpse on the grass and quickly turned away. He took Nimuri's head in his hands and turned her face away from the carnage as well. There was nothing we could have done to stop that from happening, he said quickly, forcing her head to stay in place so she didn't look back at the mangled corpse. Okay, this wasn't your fault, it wasn't mine. It was an unexpected accident. It's okay, you're okay, he told her. Nimuri's eyes, while dry, were wild and full of panic. Shouta was still forcing her to look at him as she tried to glance back at the body. Don't look, Shouta said. We should have, Nimuri began quickly. Shouta shook his head to silence her. God, how did things take such an unsightly turn so quickly? He thought, also quite shaken from what they'd just witnessed. There was nothing we could have done, he assured her. Neither of our quirks was suited to help them. That was going to happen no matter what we did. But there was nothing we could have done, Nem, Shouta repeated. We should go inside and phone the police. Get you calmed down, Shouta added, looking at her in concern. Nimuri nodded her head jerkily, and Shouta slowly released his hands from her face. The second he let go, so she turned back towards the corpse. "Nimuri, please," Shouta all but begged. While Shouta refused to give in to the urge to get another look at the corpse, he watched Nimuri's eyebrows knit together and her face turn from desolate and disturbed to confused and hopeful. Bemused, Shouta took the trauma-inducing risk of looking at the corpse and glanced to the grass beyond the porch steps. There on the ground, surrounded by a black, wispy smoke-like substance, the body was healing itself. Dual quirks, Shouta wondered. Bones began twisting to righten themselves, and wet, squelching snaps could be heard from where the pair stood. The blood that stained the grass began to emit the same type of dark smoke that surrounded the boy's body, and a groan could be heard from the person on the ground as their skin knitted itself back together. "Holy shit!" Nimuri muttered once again, uncomprehending of what she was witnessing. She ripped herself free of her best friend's hold and ran to the person, the boy by the looks of it, and fell to her knees on the grass. "Are you okay?" She asked quickly, but the boy had yet to wake up, let alone respond. "Check for a pulse," Shouta demanded. He wouldn't admit it to anyone but himself, but the entire situation had him on edge. Yes," Nimuri responded, shakily reaching up to the boy's non-mangled, non-bloody throat and pressing two quivering fingers over his pulse point. "Well?" Shouta asked after a moment, looking hopeful. Nimuri choked on her words in shock before continuing. "He's alive," she said, completely dumbfounded. Shouta hid his shock behind a neutral expression. After a moment of silence passed, he muttered to himself, "What an amazing quirk, to not only have such impressive wings, but to also be able to heal from such grievous injuries. Truly incredible." Nimuri shot him an incredulous look over her shoulder. "Seriously, a boy no older than 13 or 14 by the looks of it falls out of the sky, breaking just about every bone in his body in the process, and the only thing you can think about is how incredible his quirk is." She admonished severely. Shouta mumbled something about the fact that the boy was alive, wasn't he? But could see her point. "You're right," he said, acknowledging her concern while Nimuri checked the boy over. "I'll call an ambulance." He then sped into the house and grabbed his phone from where it had been charging. He dialed 119 and put the phone to his ear, waiting as the phone rang. 119, what is your emergency?" A voice answered as the call connected. "I need an ambulance at X Street, house number XXX. A boy was flying overhead and crash-landed in my backyard. He has a wing quirk and some kind of healing quirk. He was in pretty rough shape initially, but managed to heal. We think he's okay, but he's unconscious." "Emergency services will be on the way shortly, sir," the voice replied. Shouta called Hisashi from the hospital. He was doing his radio show and was freaked out when his husband started with, "I'm in the emergency room." But he quickly calmed when he realized it wasn't Shouta or Nimuri who had gotten hurt. Shouta briefly explained the situation, and Hisashi decided he'd sign off of the broadcast a bit earlier than initially planned to go comfort his husband and closest friend. When the voice hero made it to the hospital and rushed through the halls to where Shouta and Nimuri were waiting outside a room, a doctor was already explaining that the child was perfectly unharmed and should wake up at any moment now. "Shoo!" Hisashi cried as the group turned to the source of the noise. "Oh, thank God, you're here." Shouta turned to his husband as the man embraced him. The doctor looked a bit put off by their PDA but said nothing on the matter. Instead, he continued with what he had been saying before being interrupted by Hisashi's arrival. "While the boy is perfectly uninjured as of right now, he has extensive and major scarring all along his body. Oddly enough, the scars are golden in color, though that could be due to his quirk." The man's face then darkened, and the trio awaited his next words with nervous dread. "Along with the visible scarring, we did some X-rays to make sure there was no lasting damage from the fall. What we found is disturbing, to say the least." The man cleared his throat, looking over the boy's chart with distaste before continuing. "It is clear that he has sustained many broken bones in the past, with some looking to have been broken multiple times. Some breaks are in the same place as well." The three pro-heroes only stared at the doctor in stunned silence. "But he's okay?" Nimuri asked cautiously. The doctor gave her a solemn look. "Physically, yes." A pause. "Mentally, we'll have to wait until he wakes up." Nimuri nodded her head a bit shakily at his response. She just hoped the kid was all right. We'll also have to see about contacting his guardians at some point. The detective you called should be able to get some information out of him." He paused thoughtfully. "As I told you earlier, I predict he will wake up within the next half an hour or so." "Thank you, Dr. Kobayashi. We'll do everything we can to help the kid," Shouta said. The doctor gave a slight nod. "Of course, I will keep you informed until we get a hold of his parents or guardian. For now, I have other patients I must attend to." Dr. Kobayashi gave a small sigh and they all watched as the man turned and walked away. Hisashi waited until the man was out of earshot before speaking. "What exactly happened? No one is hurt, at least anymore, right?" He asked quietly as he subtly checked Shouta and Nimuri over for any visible injury or harm with his eyes. "We're okay, calm down," Shouta said with a fond eye roll. Apparently Hisashi wasn't being as subtle as he thought he was. "It's just as I explained on the phone, everything's fine." Shouta ran a hand through his long, unruly hair as he looked at the door leading to where the boy from earlier was lying unconscious on a hospital bed. "Nimuri and I were talking on the porch when all of a sudden a child fell from the sky." "But he's okay?" Hisashi asked worriedly. Shouta and Nimuri nodded their heads in unison. They knew Hisashi had just heard firsthand that the boy was fine, but he'd always been a worrywart when it came to children. "You should have seen it, Zashi. He was a mess." I was terrified," Nimuri recalled with a shudder, haunted by the memory of a broken body and split-open flesh, the sound of bones snapping and blood splattering against the dirt and grass. Then all of a sudden he began healing like nothing ever happened, like regenerating after being violently smashed against the ground doesn't completely defy all logic and reason. She wouldn't admit it, but the situation had her perplexed, unable to wrap her head around how he was okay. There was only one thing she knew for certain. That boy should be dead. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he was genuinely immortal." Nimuri shook her head at the thought, unable to understand it. Was it even possible to have such a powerful quirk? Hisashi looked at her with wide eyes. "Is a quirk like that even possible?" he asked, echoing her thoughts. Nimuri glanced away from him, looking thoughtful for a moment. She wouldn't have thought it to be conceivable before witnessing it for herself. But what she'd seen, the way his body had been so irreparably broken. "I'm not sure, but there's no way he should have been able to heal from that the way he did," she muttered quietly, so no one else in the hall would hear her. "I brushed off what Shouta said when he first healed, but he was right. He has an amazing quirk. Not only does he have massive wings, but he can also heal from what I assume to be any injury. It's truly something to behold," she said in a hushed tone. "Any injury, do you really think that?" Hisashi asked, incredulous. "Yes." Nimuri grabbed Hisashi by the shoulders, face worried and guarded, but eyes alight with excitement. "Just think of what kind of hero he could become with a dual quirk like that," she muttered, eyes practically sparkling at the thought. Whoa, Shouta cut in. "Let's not go making plans for this kid yet. We don't even know who his parents are or what he wants," Shouta told her. Nimuri frowned. Shouta was always shooting down her ideas like that, but she was used to it. She was also used to fighting him on it. "But if he wanted to be a hero, one of us could give him a recommendation to Yuyui. We could." "Nimuri," Shouta scolded and Nimuri pouted. "But just think of the potential, Shu. He could probably even surpass all M." Before she could finish what she was saying, however, an ungodly wail echoed throughout the hospital's bare walls, causing them to wince and cover their ears. "What is that?" Hisashi shouted, but no one could hear even him over the loud cry. The screeching continued for only a few more seconds, then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. "Holy shit," Hisashi said, bemused. "That was louder than my quirk, for God's sake. What was that?" But before either Nimuri or Shouta could respond, the door to the boy's hospital room shot open and the boy stepped through. All three of them paused at the sight of his eyes and the golden scars that decorated his exposed skin. They watched him pause at the sight of them, saw the way his giant wings seemed to twitch as if he were intimidated by the small group. "Where the fuck am I? And what am I wearing?" he asked in a language none of them understood while he gestured to the plain hospital gown draped along his thin frame. His voice sounded unnatural, like many voices layered over one another as he spoke. It was frightening to hear at first, but there was also something almost ethereal about it. He looked towards the trio ahead of him, taking a threatening step forward. "Answer me, mortals," he bellowed, trying to mask his fear and confusion with anger. None of them knew what he was saying, let alone how to react. The boy stared at them for a moment longer before looking around. "Where in the mortal plane am I?" he asked, looking more and more scared by the second. "Kid, calm down," Hisashi said gently. The boy gazed at him assessingly for a moment. The gold of his eyes began to spin around rapidly, and he looked slightly shocked. "Japanese?" he asked, this time with more surprise than false bravado and anger in his tone. His voice had also changed from the unnatural seraphim choir-like lull to something more normal sounding. His accent was nearly perfect, but at the same time strange. It wasn't one any of them had ever heard before, but the alluring lilt was somehow enticing. The gold flecks in his eyes were spinning around more languidly now, and it would be beautiful if all three of them weren't scared shitless. Nimuri, whose heart had nearly given out at the sight of him after such an unholy sound, was the next to speak. "Yes, Japanese, do you know the language?" she asked cautiously. What in God's name is going on, she wondered. "Yes, I know every language of mortals such as yourselves. They are all quite simple to grasp. How you aren't all multilingual is a mystery to me," the kid said matter-of-factly. The trio looked at one another, not understanding what he meant. "Okay," Hisashi muttered. "Do you want to go inside your room and speak properly? There's a detective on his way here to speak with you. He will be here shortly." Hisashi took a small step towards him, but the boy only staggered back. "Stay away." He screamed in that strange language. Hisashi, while not understanding exactly what the kid was saying, got the message and took a step away. "Where the fuck are the hospital staff when you need them?" Shouta muttered dryly, unamused. Of course, the kid who crashed-landed in their backyard had to be some foreigner lunatic with a powerful quirk. "I can always just make him unable to use his wings," Shouta grumbled internally. "We're not going to hurt you, okay, kiddo?" Nimuri said slowly, raising her hands placatingly to show she wasn't a threat. "Tell that to the last angel who was exiled to Earth," the boy spat. "They endured decades of torture at the hands of the American government before they were finally put out of their misery," he muttered darkly. "Okay, so definite head case then," Shouta thought in bewilderment. All right, we're not like them, got it. No torture, no putting anyone out of their misery. We just want to talk," Hisashi tried to console, sensing the child may be unwell in the head. The boy looked at him assessingly. He reached a hand up to his chest as if he could feel something there before he conceded and nodded his head. "All right," he muttered, "but I warn you I am not like the others." His eyes narrowed as he spoke, a dangerous edge in his voice. "My abilities are far more complicated, far more powerful. One step out of line and it's your head on the floor, your blood at my feet." "Holy shit, this kid is terrifying," Hisashi thought, glancing at Shouta nervously. The man simply shook his head and returned to his anxious gaze, watching the boy curl his wings behind his back as he re-entered the hospital room. "His quirks are those wings and healing, and he doesn't have any weapons on his person. Nimuri checked. We'll be fine." Shouta assured Hisashi and Nimuri quietly before hurriedly following after the unnamed boy. The boy was already sitting on the bed when they entered the room. "We'll wait for Detective Tsukachi to get here, that way you can be questioned properly," Shouta said as he eyed the boy wearily. He didn't know what else to say. The boy smirked at them, though he looked a bit nauseous. Nonetheless, the smirk caused the group discomfort as it only added to their nerves. "What?" Shouta asked, not liking the shit-eating grin spread across his face. Even so, something told him it was merely a mask the boy was wearing. He could tell by the way his eyes swirled continuously, and though he didn't know exactly what that meant, he had a gut feeling it meant he was nervous. The way his wings twitched every so often, the way he was slightly curled in on himself, his arms laid across his stomach and his shoulders hunched. If you knew anything about body language, which Shouta did, it was easy to see how anxious the boy truly was. "You are afraid of me," the boy once again said matter-of-factly. "Well, you too are. You think there is a possibility that I could overpower you," he clarified, pointing towards Hisashi and Nimuri. "Which I easily could." Shouta went to speak, but Izuku put up a hand to stop him, effectively silencing the man. Shouta opened his mouth to object regardless, but found that he couldn't. Shocked by the possibility of a third quirk, but still level-headed, he used his own quirk on the boy. His eyes glowed red and his hair began to float upwards as he tried once more to force sound past his lips. Blinking in confusion as he opened and closed his mouth, he found his speech was still blocked. Is this not his quirk? Is there someone else here? But a much more terrifying thought came to mind soon afterwards. Or does my quirk not work on him? He wondered. It's rude to interrupt people, the boy said lowly while looking at Shouta. His husband and best friend's faces morphed into ones of bewilderment. He hasn't said a word, so why? Nimuri thought as they both turned their attention to Shouta, shocked to see him using his quirk when there was no visible threat. Then again, he sometimes did it to intimidate people. The man continued glaring assessingly at the boy, still trying to use his quirk. Hisashi went to speak, but the boy dismissively waved him off, continuing before he could so much as open his mouth. As I was saying, this one, he then gestured to Shouta, was slightly concerned, but now he's just confused and a tad bit nervous. His grin widened at his own observation. Then again, you're all feeling that way. I have to wonder about the concerned part, though. Is it because you watched me fall from the very heavens themselves? He asked, eyes flickering as he placed his elbows on his crossed legs and rested his chin in the palm of his hands slyly. We aren't, Nimuri cleared her throat, trying to make her words sound more confident than she really was. We aren't scared of you, she told him. Really? The boy asked, once again reaching towards his chest. Because I can feel other people's emotions, and the moment I talked about rolling heads and spilled blood, I could feel just the smallest prickle of fear from all of you. He informed them. But with Hobo over here, those feelings quickly went away when he told you and Blondie that he had searched me for weapons, though they've returned now that I've taken away his ability to speak. His smile vanished, his face twisting into a cold and grim expression. On a side note, if you honestly think angels don't have celestial weaponry, you're only fooling yourselves. Finally finished speaking, he lowered his hand, effectively returning Shouta's ability to talk. You may speak. Nimuri and Hisashi turned to stare at Shouta in shock, finally having put two and two together and realizing what the boy had done. Is that why Shu used his quirk? Hisashi wondered. But then why didn't he speak after using it? How many quirks do you have, kid? Shouta asked, interrupting Hisashi's train of thought. Everyone in the room was slowly starting to look more and more nervous at the amount of quirks the boy was showing. Shouta thought that the boy may have simply been reading their facial expressions and body language for that last one, but the description of Shouta's emotions, and most likely Nimuri and Hisashi's, too, had been spot on. Not to mention the fact that he'd shown 3 quirks already, if not 4, by canceling out Shouta's eraser quirk, which makes 5 altogether. Quirks? Izuku asked dumbly, looking genuinely bemused. What are quirks? The trio didn't answer, they only stared at him shocked and incredulous. Just what is going on here? Shouta wondered. Is this some sort of ruse? Carefully assessing the situation, Shouta thought about what kind of individual this kid could be. All the possibilities spun around his mind, everything from the boy being certifiably insane to the possibility of him being a villain. After all, it may have been more than a coincidence that he'd fallen into 2 pro-heroes' backyard. Before Shouta could ask any further questions, however, there was a knock at the door. The man eyed the kid for another moment before slowly turning towards the door and opening it. Ah, Detective Tsukachi, what good timing, Shouta said, glad to be saved by someone who could likely get the answers they were looking for. Naomasa nodded and entered the room before promptly stopping in his tracks at the sight of the boy. His mouth fell open at the kid's wings, eyes, and the golden marks covering his body. Something was disturbing, yet at the same time beautiful about them. I've never seen a mutation like this before, he thought to himself in astonishment. He gulped and closed his mouth, promptly shaking off the boy's strange appearance. Hello, I am Detective Tsukachi from the Musutafu Police Department. Do you mind if I ask you some questions? Oh, this one's intrigued, the boy cooed. By my appearance, I'm guessing. Naomasa coughed and cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. I'm not sure if feeling my emotions is part of your quirk, but yes, your appearance is very intriguing. He smiled down at the boy, who frowned at him with a quizzical expression. I still don't know what a quirk is, but go ahead and ask your questions, Detective Tsukachi. Shouta looked at the man, who went back to gaping. He quickly pulled out his notebook and drew a checkmark, indicating the boy was telling the truth about not knowing what quirks were. The boy could feel the shift of emotions in all of them, but couldn't piece together why just yet. Okay, we'll start simple, Naomasa said calmly. What is your name? The boy narrowed his eyes as if thinking. I think my name is Izuku, but it's been a while since I was actually called that. Everyone just calls me Deku. Neyamasa seemed concerned by his words as he wrote another checkmark on his notepad. He wanted to ask for a last name but wasn't sure the boy even knew, judging by his previous response. Either way, he found the other matter more pressing. As in useless. He asked in a disgusted tone. Izuku glanced at him with a sorrowful expression on his face. "Sort of, but not really," he muttered. Neyamasa looked at the boy, noting the way the specks of gold in his otherwise dark eyes seemed to spin more rapidly at the confession. "What does it mean for you?" he asked. "It's a word used to describe an unholy being, someone who defies God and everything he stands for. In other words, a demon." Izuku muttered. His Ashi looked at Shota, mouthing the word cult. But Shota shook his head, not knowing the answer. Izuku didn't notice what had transpired between the two as he looked to Neyamasa and continued. "If I wasn't being called Deku, I was being called things such as abomination, freak of nature, abhorrent, ungodly, sinful, you name it. Any horrible word you can think of, especially something meaning unholy, I've probably heard at least once." Izuku turned his gold-specked eyes away from them, unable to look at the group after admitting something so embarrassing. He may have been an angel in name, and he may have been more powerful than any of his kind, but none of that mattered. To heaven, he was nothing more than a drop of water in a stormy cloud. They'd all patiently waited for the day it would finally rain, and he'd fall to earth like the useless drop of water he was, waited for him to be cast into the sea of nameless faces, abandoned and scorned. Lost in the waves, never to return to those clouds again. Neyamasa wrote another checkmark on his notepad page, not looking away from Izuku. "And where do you come from, Izuku?" "The celestial realm, heaven," he replied solemnly, as if it were something he wasn't proud of. Neyamasa stared at him, shocked. The room held their breath, all of them looking to either Izuku or Neyamasa's notepad. The detective raised his hand, and with a shaky grip on his pen, he made another checkmark. The room was silent. Izuku could feel their shock but refused to speak on the matter as he thought about all he'd lost. If that's true," Neyamasa paused for a moment, Izuku's words sinking in. "Then why are you here?" he asked. Izuku's face paled at the mention of his exile. Red tears gathered in his eyes, further cementing the possibility that he was, in fact, not of this world. "Because I'm not like everyone else. I'm different," he muttered. "I wasn't born of the same celestial power as the other angels, and I was hated for it, not to mention the fact that none of my abilities are the same as the others. Sure, there are similarities, but I've never been normal to them. To the angels, to the elders, to God." The bloody tears that had gathered in his eyes began to fall as he admitted to his faults. He wanted to say more as he'd never really had anyone to talk to, no one who would listen. He may never see these people again, so what was the harm? For once, could he spill his heart out for someone, anyone, to hear? "You know," he said after a moment, "I didn't have one friend up there. Not a single angel treated me kindly. I was nothing more than a monster bred from sin to them. They all hated me. They laughed at me and threw harsh words at me every chance they got. I was always made fun of because of my black hair, eyes, and wings, while they all had their perfect white and gold. There was not a day that went by where I prayed to that stupid oaf, God, to just get it over with and kill me already." The tears of blood began falling more rapidly from Izuku's eyes as he spoke. He wiped them away quickly, smearing the red liquid all over the palms of his hands. "When I was a child, the other children used to rub it in my face that they got to go to school, while I sat alone in my empty house reading those stupid books to fulfill my education. I hated being isolated, but I was always by myself. I was alone every single day. I had no one. No one ever loved me or cared about me." His body shook as he let out small keens while he cried. The way he cried was unusual, but if he really was an angel, that could be the reason his sobs were so different from what would be considered normal. "So I started acting up. If I was causing trouble, at least someone would pay attention to me, if only for a little while. Is it so wrong of me to crave interaction?" Bloody tears continued to build up in his eyes, but every time they got close to spilling over, he'd wipe them away angrily. "I was a kid. I'm still a kid. I've got millions of years ahead of me, and they just cast me out like I'm nothing. I'm not nothing. The only reason they hate me so much is because I'm stronger than them. It was fear that caused their hatred, nothing else. And what does God do? Not a damn thing. He left me to rot, alone with my thoughts and useless prayers. Prayers to not be so alone, prayers for a friend, prayers for anything but the life I was fucking born into. But what does he do instead? He exiles me to this place, the accursed mortal plane where sin is second nature to all, because that's all I am, all I'll ever be, a sinner. By the time he had finished his rant, he was full-on sobbing into his hands, the sound high and strange. He wanted to scream, he wanted to open a black hole that would swallow up the entire earth along with himself. I hate God. He howled, giving in to the urge. He turned his head skyward and threw his arms out to his sides, sending red specks of blood flying from his hands where they splattered against the wall. I hate him and everything he fucking stands for. The adults stood in stunned silence, not knowing what to say. Izuku felt their emotions, their concern and mortification at his words. He turned to them, eyes still leaking bloody tears. "I'm sorry," he murmured. They turned to Tsukachi, who only nodded his head. "He's telling the truth," he mouthed to them. They looked from Naomasa to Izuku, the silence in the room deafening after the boys, the angels, outburst. "It's gonna be okay, kiddo," Hisashi said, taking a step toward Izuku. When the boy didn't react, he took another, and another until finally he was sitting beside him. "How can it be okay? I'm trapped in the mortal realm. I'm not worried about being kidnapped and experimented on like stupid Mako was, but dear heavens, now up above, what am I going to do?" He sobbed. Hisashi wrapped his arms around the boy, who shook slightly in his hold as he keened. Nimuri turned to Shouta then, her stunned expression on full display. "Shouta," Nimuri said carefully, watching as the exasperated man turned to her. "What?" he asked before looking away from the angel on the hospital bed. You said you wouldn't adopt a kid unless God himself asked you to, right?" Nimuri muttered lowly so neither Hisashi nor Izuku could hear her. Shouta's face morphed into a displeased expression as he frowned. It was obvious where this was going. "Well," she said, "I think he just asked." Shouta stared at Nimuri, an incredulous look on his face. "You cannot be serious," he said lowly so Izuku wouldn't hear him. "You said," she began, but Shouta cut her off. "I know what I said." He glanced to where his husband was trying to calm the keening boy down before he pinched the bridge of his nose wearily. He gestured to the door, signaling for them to take the conversation into the hall. As soon as the pair had exited the room, Nimuri began her rant. "Shouta, if this isn't a sign from God himself, I don't know what is," Nimuri huffed as soon as the door clicked shut behind her friend. Shouta raised an eyebrow and gave her an unimpressed look. Is she really this naive? He thought in exasperation. "Shouta, you—" "No," he interrupted. "We don't know who he is, where he came from, or what he's doing here. We don't even know if he's telling the truth. Can you honestly look me in the eye and tell me you believe that he's an angel, Nimuri?" His brain was going a mile a minute as he thought up plausible scenarios as to why the boy may truly be there. None of them looked good. "Of course I believe him." Tsukachi used his quirk. Everything he said was true. Nimuri gave Shouta a pleading look, almost as though she were begging for him to understand. She knew it was unbelievable, but she had a gut feeling, and my gut feelings are never wrong. Maybe to him? Shouta's eyes narrowed as he thought. He could have been brainwashed by some cult. It wouldn't be the first time. Shouta thought back to all the horror stories he'd heard. He was more inclined to believe that the boy had gotten those injuries in a cult as opposed to heaven. "Then how do you explain everything we saw both at your house and in that room?" Her eyes were lit with determination as she spoke fervently. Shouta shook his head, but she ignored him and plowed on. "His appearance, multiple quirks, the ability to heal from such grievous injuries. Can't you just accept that maybe there is something greater than simply living your life and then being thrown into endless nothingness?" She implored, searching for a way to bridge the gap between Shouta's disbelief and the unexplainable. Shouta closed his eyes, inhaling a long breath. As he exhaled slowly, he said, "I have another theory, but you're not going to like it." Pausing, he looked at Nimuri, who gestured for him to continue. "There's a strong possibility that he's a villain," he muttered darkly. Nimuri gave him a skeptical and somewhat enraged look as she scoffed at his words. "A villain," she hissed. "Do I have to spell it out for you?" Tsukachi used his quirk on him. Everything he said was the truth, at least to him anyway. "Even if he's not an angel, even if he's been brainwashed by a cult, I don't see how you could make the jump to villainy." Shouta looked around to be sure no one was listening in on their conversation, before glancing back at Nimuri, finding her visibly afflicted by his words. She'd always grown attached quickly, especially to the younger generation. He didn't doubt that after hearing the boy's sob story, she had become emotionally invested. That's why Shouta had been worried she would react like this, but his theory held merit. He didn't just come up with the notion out of nowhere. "Think about this seriously for a moment, Nimuri," Shouta muttered lowly. Her livid expression didn't change, but she didn't show any signs of stopping what he was about to say either. His appearance could be a very rare mutation-type quirk. As for the detective, he easily stopped me from using my quirk, so who's to say he can't do the same to Tsukochi's? His eyes narrowed. Thinking along those lines, there's a good chance that he's able to manipulate quirks. He took a moment to let the information sink in before he gave the big revelation. Now, think about it. Who do we know that can give people multiple quirks? The look on Nimuri's face shifted as she paled. She knew exactly who he meant. That's not," she spluttered. "Why would all for one?" She glanced to the hospital room door nervously, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her face twisted up slightly, the information like a punch to the gut. "Regardless, it's possible," she admitted. "In today's world, anything is." Shouta nodded his head, glad she was finally seeing his side of things. "But that's also why I'd like to be able to believe in him, Shouta. What you're saying, it's not a stretch. But why would he show off his powers? Why would he give us a reason to doubt him? Surely if he was working with All for One, he'd have a better plan. He wouldn't ruin everything the second he woke up." Shouta glanced at her, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. "We need to proceed with caution, Nimuri. If there's even a slight chance that he's involved with All for One, we can't afford to underestimate the threat." Nimuri shook her head in disagreement. "I understand, but we can't just jump to conclusions without hard evidence either. Can't you just believe in something good for once?" Shouta sighed heavily and shook his head, but he guessed that if he wanted her to see his side of things, he'd have to try seeing hers as well. "Fine," he conceded, "but we're not just going to let this slide either." She gave a determined nod. "Thank you, Shouta." Hisashi watched as Nimuri and Shouta silently exited the room to talk in the hall. He'd seen what looked to be the beginning of an argument and was glad they were leaving the room to diffuse whatever tension was building up between them. Izuku didn't seem to notice the pair slip out of the room, as he was too busy keening into his hands to pay attention. "I just hate my life so much," he sobbed brokenly. "What have I done to deserve this?" Izuku's body shook with the force of his sobs, blood oozing from between his fingers due to the sheer amount of tears streaming from his eyes. Neyamasa winced as Hisashi continued rubbing soothing circles into the young angel's back. The detective didn't know what to say to make the boy feel better, something he was usually good at. The entire situation was a little, very, jarring, so sue him for being at a loss for words. Instead, he took a seat beside Izuku, hoping his presence would be of even a little help. He reached his hand out and placed it on Izuku's shoulder as the boy leaned into the touch. It made Neyamasa feel slightly better about his lack of ability to soothe him verbally. While Neyamasa was at a loss for what to say, Hisashi had taken those few moments to gather his thoughts. He rubbed his hand along Izuku's knobby spine, and was this kid malnourished on top of everything else? A few more times before he took in a deep breath. "Izuku," he started, his voice gentle. "You're not at fault for what you've been through, okay? The circumstances of your birth, whatever they are, it's not something you brought upon yourself, it's not something you can change or choose. You've been through a lot, I bet, but for now, just try looking toward the future. That's all any of us can hope to do in situations like these," Hisashi said as another high-pitched keen escaped past Izuku's throat, but he continued on unperturbed. "You've said you were always alone before, right?" he asked. Izuku sobbed a few more times in that strange high whine before nodding his head, his eyes squeezed together tightly. "Well, I won't let you be alone like that ever again," he said. "We're going to help you. We won't let you suffer any longer. We will save you." Izuku paused, his cries slowly dying down as he tried to understand the meaning behind Hisashi's words. He opened his eyes and peered up at the man through his hands, face hopeful. "Why would you want to help me?" he asked slowly. "Well, I know you don't know what quirks are, but Shouta, Nimuri, and I are pro-heroes." Hisashi gave Izuku a reassuring smile, "And that's just what heroes do." "So you don't hate me?" he muttered quietly, the gold flecks in his eyes spinning rapidly as his heart sped in anticipation of the answer. Hisashi smiled softly at the boy, giving him a shake of the head. How could I possibly hate you, Izuku? You've done nothing wrong. Izuku's mouth fell open as he tried to form a response to that, trying to find something to say. He wanted to refute it, wanted to tell this man every horrible thing he'd done in heaven, all in the hopes of getting even an ounce of the other angel's attention. Instead, more tears filled his eyes as he looked up at the man. They weren't tears of fear, anger, or hurt. They were tears of relief, something he'd never experienced before. The emotion flooded his chest, a feeling he'd only ever felt through someone else. His face contorted into an expression of vulnerability at the revelation as he stared at Hisashi. The blonde looked at him in concern, and Izuku gave a small shake of his head, able to sense his unease. He wiped at his face, which was a lost cause by this point, as it was completely smeared with blood. I think, Izuku paused, not knowing how to tell the mortal what he was thinking without it being too embarrassing. I just feel relieved is all, he muttered as he ducked his head bashfully. I'm glad. Hisashi's smile returned just as Nimuri and Shouta decided to finally make a reappearance. Nimuri grinned at the teen while Shouta frowned. Izuku looked at the black-haired man wearily, the spinning gold flecks in his eyes slowing down. He reached his hand up to his chest as he'd done earlier, grasping at the fabric of his hospital gown as he said, You don't trust me. Why? Shouta showed no reaction to the question while Hisashi and Nimuri fought the urge to facepalm. Hisashi stood and walked up to his husband quickly. Shouta, I just calmed him down. Why don't you go get some coffee? He said quietly. Shouta looked between Nimuri, Hisashi, and Izuku, weighing his options. If he is working for All for One, he could attack at any moment. It would be better to have all the manpower we can get. I'd rather stay, he drawled, eyeing Izuku cautiously from across the room. Izuku didn't say anything, but he looked genuinely put out by the emotions he felt coming from Shouta. The angel glanced away, obviously uncomfortable. At that, Shouta's expression softened minutely. It's possible. In today's world, anything is. But that's also why I'd like to be able to believe in him, Shouta. Nimuri's words from just a few moments ago echoed in his mind, and he cursed himself for getting soft. There was nothing else they could do but wait and see what would come of this. Doctor, Kuro shouted as she ran up to Dr. Kobayashi's table in the cafeteria. Miss Iyazaki, the man said, looking startled. Can't you see I'm on break? He asked, but the way she was fidgeting made him slightly nervous. What's wrong? He asked. The blood tests for your patient, Dr. Kobayashi. I've never seen anything like it before. She was bouncing from foot to foot now, wearing an expression of both astonishment and nervous excitement. You have to see it. Can't this wait? Kobayashi asked, though even he was intrigued by the sudden turn of events on his otherwise uneventful lunch break. You have to see this right now. She insisted, her urgency palpable. Kobayashi glanced at his sandwich before putting it on the table. Oh, what the hell, why not? And with that, the pair hurriedly departed from the cafeteria. Shouta was watching Nimuri groom Izuku's wings when someone began knocking on the door frantically. Izuku jumped slightly at the sound, the action not going unnoticed by the three pro heroes and detective in the room. After all, they were trained to look for behaviors like that. Eventually, it just becomes second nature. Shouta got up from his chair with a bemused expression, crossing the room quickly. He opened the door, only to be met with the faces of Izuku's doctor and a girl he didn't recognize. Is there a reason you're banging on the door so obnoxiously? He asked, where was the professionalism he'd seen earlier. Aizawa, sir, there's something you should see, Dr. Kobayashi spoke quickly. Shouta hid his confusion as he glanced back at Hisashi. You good if I step out with Izuku's doctor for a moment? He asked. Hisashi gave his husband a thumbs up and a yeah, which was much more subdued than usual, probably for Izuku's sake. Shouta gave a nod and followed the doctor out into the hallway. What is this about? He asked as Dr. Kobayashi and Kuro led him down the halls. You should see for yourself, sir, Kuro said. Shouta could feel a headache coming on as they continued down the hall. Shouta was silent as the two people ahead of him chattered quietly as they walked. He tried to discern what they were saying, but couldn't hear a word due to them speaking so low. He wasn't sure whether or not he should ask them more questions, or if he even wanted to in the first place, so instead he stayed silent. After walking for a few moments, the two hospital staff came to a halt outside of a room with two large doors. Shouta glanced at the sign above the entrance where the words blood testing were written in bold letters. What are we doing here? Shouta wondered. Dr. Kobayashi opened the door and led them inside. As I explained earlier, I drew some blood from Izuku to make sure there was no clotting in the bloodstream after receiving such extensive damage to his body, the doctor said, before looking at Kuro to pick up where he'd left off. I centrifuged the blood sample. Centrifugation is a process that separates the blood into its different components. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma, Kuro began, but I found something odd, very odd. She pulled up a chart on her tablet and showed it to Shouta, whose eyes scanned the screen. What am I looking at here? He asked, not understanding what the big deal was. This, she pointed towards two repeating letters on the screen, a small list of NAs at the bottom. Shouta stared at her in bemusement, not understanding where this was going. Not available, what does that mean? He asked. Kuro shook her head. At first, I was puzzled too. I could have written it off as some sort of glitch in the system, but it's never happened before. Setting the tablet aside, she pulled out a vial containing Izuku's blood from the collection tube on the large table. Curious, I examined the blood under a microscope, and that's when I realized something. She used one of the blood pipettes from the same table to draw a small amount of Izuku's blood from the vial. She grabbed a microscope slide and hovered the pipette over it, allowing a drop of the liquid to fall onto the glass surface. Placing a cover slip over the slide, she approached one of the available microscopes. I'm guessing I'm about to see for myself what you found. Shouta drawled. Yes, Kuro whispered as she shifted the slide into place and covered it with the stage clips. Look, she said in fascination. Shouta walked towards where she was standing and looked inside the eyepiece, his usually stoic features morphing with shock and amazement. There, magnified 100 times in Izuku's blood, were microscopic black symbols painting a clear picture onto each faintly glowing cell. Not only that, but between each writhing cell a black, almost wispy substance coated the spaces in between. I don't think, Kuro began slowly, I don't think that the NAs on the chart was a glitch in the system. She paused, contemplating how to say this without causing alarm. Shouta glanced up from the microscope, awaiting whatever she was going to say next with apprehension. I think it's simply a compound that has never been discovered before. Shouta's eyes widened in disbelief, unable to believe what he was hearing. It's possible. In today's world, anything is. Crap, Shouta muttered. He is an angel. Shouta had been gone for half an hour by the time he returned to Izuku's hospital room. He lightly knocked on the door, not awaiting a response before opening it and stepping inside with a strained look on his otherwise blank face. May I speak to you three in the hallway? He asked. The trio shared a look, knowing this had to be about whatever Izuku's doctor had shown him. Of course, Tsukachi said lightly as they all got to their feet and followed Shouta into the hall. The exhausted-looking man waited for the door to shut completely before he started. I believe he was telling the truth, he said quietly. And you didn't before? Hisashi asked. He gave his Shouta an incredulous look as he said, but Tsukachi used his quirk. He turned to Nimuri, his expression curious. Does this have anything to do with what you two stepped out of the room to talk about? He asked her. However, Nimuri didn't respond, as the previous revelation was the only thing to register in her mind. The woman had perked up at Shouta's declaration, her interest piqued. She ignored Hisashi, who hadn't been a part of the conversation they'd shared earlier, as she stepped closer to Shouta. She gazed at him with a somewhat quizzical expression, though it was more relieved than anything else. What changed your mind? She asked. Whatever it was had to be big, or he wouldn't sound so sure of himself. Nimuri would be lying if she said she didn't have some doubts of her own, doubts which Shouta had placed in her mind earlier with his talk of all for one and villainy. You were so against it not too long ago, so what happened? What's causing you to reconsider your theory? She paused, eyes narrowing before she added, Not that I'm complaining. I never wanted to doubt the poor kid in the first place. The way she'd said it made Shouta scowl deeply. She made it sound as if doubting the boy was a damn crime, but questioning his motives wasn't even a betrayal. You can't trust just anyone, not in our line of work. Of course, he'd wanted to believe Izuku, but how could he not have reservations about something so profound? It was unbelievable at best and lunacy at worst. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he pulled the blood he'd nicked from the lab out of his pocket, holding it up for them to see. This, he stated, Izuku's blood. The group only frowned at him, not quite understanding. Tilting his head confusedly, Hisashi asked, "What about it? Does it have strange properties or something?" He narrowed his eyes at the vial, trying to see if there was anything clearly off about it. "You could say that," Shouta muttered. "I examined this blood under a microscope. Each blood cell had these peculiar symbols on them. There was something wispy and black between each one, and the cells themselves seemed to almost writhe and glow." He explained. Everyone appeared shocked by what they were hearing. After a long moment of stunned silence, as Shouter allowed them to absorb the information, Hisashi was the one to break the ice. "I'd just like to point out that I never doubted him," he grumbled as he took the vial from Shouta's hand. He examined the contents, noticing the way the surface of the liquid never stayed consistent, even as he held the glass container still. "Oh, and that's not all," Shouta added, ignoring Hisashi. The small group stared at him with rapt attention, awaiting more information. "The lab worker thinks Izuku's blood holds undiscovered elements." "Holy shit," Naomasa muttered. Shouta looked at them darkly. "So if there was any doubt, I don't think it would be wise to hold on to those feelings any longer," he said. "You're literally the only one who doubted him, though," Nimuri retorted with an eye roll. There were nods of agreement around the group at Nimuri's statement. "I wouldn't have believed him had I any other quirk," Naomasa muttered. "But my lie detector has never been wrong before." Shouta shook his head. "Listen, I'm sorry I doubted him," he told Nimuri, "but you could see where I was coming from, right?" His friend gave him a small smile. "Of course." She flipped her hair over her shoulder, turning to Hisashi. "Now, remember how you and Shu have been talking about adoption?" She asked quickly, not giving Shouta the chance to cut her off as she handed out his punishment without any hesitation. Hisashi nodded his head slowly as Shouta groaned indignantly. "Of course. It's been an ongoing topic of conversation between us for months now." More like an ongoing topic of argument, Shouta thought sarcastically. "Well, the strangest thing happened before Izuku fell out of the sky." She gave a shark-like grin before glancing at Shouta, who only squinted his eyes shut and pinched the bridge of his nose with a long sigh. "Nimuri," Shouta muttered, not wanting to be the one to have to look after some exiled angel. "God only knows what kind of shit someone would have to pull to be thrown out of heaven of all places." "What are you talking about?" Hisashi asked curiously. He placed a hand on Shouta's shoulder gently as he stared at Nimuri expectantly. He said, "The only way I'd ever adopt is if God himself asked me to." She smiled brightly at the pair. "If God practically dropping that poor angel on your front doorstep isn't him asking you to adopt him, I don't know what is." She looked between Shouta and Hisashi expectantly, watching as Hisashi's eyes turned bright. "Nimuri, I told you," Shouta began, but was promptly cut off by Hisashi's excited babbling. "Of course," Hisashi beamed. "Detective Tsukachi, do you think you could get some form of identification set up for Izuku?" He asked happily, ignoring Shouta's loud protests. "That I can do. As for fostering or adopting him, I can get you in contact with someone from the social services side of things," he said, smirking when Shouta let out a long, exasperated sigh. Hisashi's expression was exuberant as he turned to Shouta. "We're going to be fathers, Shu," he whispered excitedly. Shouta fought the urge to groan. He knew this was a battle he would inevitably lose, so instead of arguing, he let out a dismal hooray. And just like that, the couple had finally settled their argument on adoption. High above, in a realm unknown to the mortals on Earth, God sat on his throne. A window with wispy white tendrils emanating from its surface sat in front of him as he watched three people re-enter the hospital room they'd been talking outside of. He smiled to himself, his facial expression hidden by white, ethereal veils. "I answer the prayers of all my little ones, my dear angel of the void," he whispered with a hand placed against the window's surface, "and you will get your wish. You will find love and happiness, my child." He gave a fond sigh and pulled his hand away. However, after a moment of content silence, his expression darkened as a much more somber feeling washed over him. The thoughts of exactly why he'd needed to fulfill that wish in the first place plagued his mind. He began contemplating the impending peril when abruptly, the sound of rapidly beating wings ripped him from his thoughts. He looked up to see the head seer rushing into the room, her wings creating a violent wind torrent as she came to a screeching halt just past the door. "My lord!" the seer cried as she flew, much slower now, towards the throne. With a quick motion of God's hand, the window disappeared, and God angled his head to look down at the proportionally tiny creature before him. "What is wrong, Azarus?" he asked, concerned by the emotion she was displaying. "The prophecy foretelling Earth's demise," she quivered. "It has changed." God wasted no time in standing to his full, intimidating height. He loomed over the smaller angel, apprehension causing his form to flicker. "Show me," he said quickly as he teleported the pair to the chamber of Prophetia. "I warn you, my lord, it is not good," she muttered quietly as she opened the scroll hanging on the wall. The scene had been frozen during what looked to be a tableau of war. God's eyes zeroed in on the figure in the center of the frame, a boy standing tall amidst the carnage. An angel with dark, curly hair, pitch-black eyes possessing gold specks and large black wings. The only angel with such defining features. Azara stared at the scene for a moment, expression stricken. She turned her attention to God, a perturbed look on her thin face. "Just what were you really planning by sending Izuku down there, my lord?" Azarus inquired, her tone filled with fear and suspicion. God gave the angel, who had been one of the few to oppose Izuku's exile, a gentle smile. Though he knew with his face hidden beyond an enigmatic veil, she could not see his expression. "The plan, my child," he said, gesturing with a wave of his hand and causing the scene on the hanging scroll to shift. He was now able to see the beginning, where Izuku was depicted in the middle of a ruthless, bloody battle with that man. Is to save Earth from him, and to have Izuku, the only one capable of such a feat, be the one to do it. Azarus shuddered, unable to believe what God had done, the danger he'd put one of his angels in. But the truth was, she was only getting half the story. It had been 3 days since Izuku had crash-landed in Shouta and Hisashi's backyard. He had been waiting to be discharged from the hospital for 2 days by that point, but he wasn't able to be released until he had some form of identification. He also needed to be released into a parent's, or in this case, temporary guardian's care due to his apparent age. Izuku was quiet for the most part, and no one wanted to pry into his circumstances. But even in his reticence, they'd come to learn a few things about Izuku. The fact that he was different from all the other angels, that he'd had no one in heaven, and how he'd given up on praying regularly hundreds of years ago. After that casual revelation, Shouta had asked him how old he was, to which the boy responded with a muttered, 715, sir. Both Hisashi and Shouta had been shocked to hear this, and they began to wonder if Izuku even needed guardians in the first place. Shouta was just relieved to have some form of argument on why they shouldn't adopt the kid. He brought it up with Hisashi while the pair drove home that night, but his husband had been quick to dismiss his concerns as he discussed his suspicions that Izuku may cognitively be a teenager. "I mean, come on, you have to admit that it makes sense, Shu. Based on the way he looks and behaves, do you honestly think he's got a brain to match his age?" And so they asked about it the next day. Izuku had pondered the question for a moment before responding in a subdued voice. "I would say I'm around 14 or 15 in mortal years." Much to Hisashi's relief, it was a day later today that Naomasa called Hisashi to inform him that he'd gotten the paperwork filled out and that, "You'd better thank me because I did some under-the-table, sketchy shit to get it." Hisashi only laughed and told him he'd take him out for a drink sometime soon, and that's how they ended up driving home with an angel in their back seat. "Did you want to get something to eat on the way home, kiddo?" Hisashi asked as he peered at Izuku from the rearview mirror. Izuku turned his gaze from the city streets to Hisashi, the gold flecks in his eyes beginning to spin quickly as his face almost lit up, almost. Hisashi smiled at the boy, but his face fell when the golden flecks slowed and Izuku's expression darkened. "I can't take their hard-earned money. That would be selfish, sinful," he thought to himself. Schooling his emotions and his craving for sustenance, he shook his head slowly and returned his gaze out the window. "No, thanks," he muttered. "I'm used to being hungry anyway," his mind supplied. "And it's not like I need to eat as much as mortals do." He leaned his head against the window, his stomach aching slightly. Hisashi frowned at what he was witnessing. Thinking back on it, had the boy eaten in the hospital? He retraced his thoughts to Izuku's stay, trying to remember whether or not he'd seen him eat. He vaguely recalled a moment when Izuku had looked at his food with disgust before placing the lid back on his meal tray, but no one had said anything about it. Why hadn't anyone said anything about it? Hisashi looked to the boy nervously as he clutched the steering wheel just a tad more tightly. "Izuku," he said gently, "is there a reason you don't want to eat?" Izuku jolted and snapped his head to stare at his guardian, his mouth falling open and closed a few times. He shook his head slightly, noticing Shouta looking at him from the corner of his eye with his head turned ever so slightly in his direction. Izuku spluttered. "Think you useless Deku think. Actually, angels don't need to eat," he said. In a way, it was true. They only needed to eat every so often, once or twice a month to be precise. He was confident he could get away with it. The excuse of "we may not need to eat, but we do like to indulge" came to mind for when he would inevitably feel famished. And though he didn't regret the words for a while after speaking them, he'd come to soon enough. It had been 4 months since Izuku had eaten, and 2 days into his stay with the Aizawa Yamadas. He was lying on his bed clutching his stomach, not understanding where this god-awful pain was coming from. "I've never needed to eat so soon after a meal," he groaned internally. "The longest I've gone was 6 months, so why on the heavenly plane am I so hungry?" He wanted to scream. It was like being eaten alive from the inside out. His mind briefly flashed to something he'd learned about while reading a book on humans, a mortal torture method where they'd cage a rat and light charcoal atop its confines, forcing the frightened rat to find an escape. The only way out being through the person's abdomen. He shuddered at the thought, but he'd been through much worse himself. "If I can stand the feeling of boiling acid being poured on my wings, surely I can survive this." But the urge to eat, the craving, was unbearable. The only thing that kept him away from the kitchen was the thought that he'd be stealing from his new guardians, and it was a thought he couldn't stand to go through with. Sure, he could simply ask for an apple or a granola bar, or whatever it was they were cooking now, which smelled so tantalizingly amazing, but he couldn't steal from them. They'd already bought him clothes before he'd gotten to their house. He couldn't take more. He clutched at his stomach as it let out another painful, gurgling growl. "I can't do this," he groaned aloud. "I just need to find something to distract myself with," he thought as he glanced around the room. There was a television sitting on the table across from the bed, but he didn't know how to use it. He came across the same issue with the laptop sitting on the desk by a tall lamp. He was used to using scrolls to watch and read things, and even then it was never anything near as complex as what mortals had. Just reruns of angelic sport, old and new. However, sitting beside the laptop, he spotted something that caught his eye. White paper with strange lines down the middle and what looked to be writing utensils. Izuku gasped, scurrying over to the desk and taking a seat. He picked up a black paintbrush, except, is this a paintbrush? He examined it, noticing that it had some sort of lid on top. He uncapped the utensil and looked around for some ink to dip the utensil in, sad to find none. Izuku would like to say he was able to figure it out quicker than he had, but he'd be lying. It was a very frustrating 5 minutes later that he finally thought to place the strange writing tool on the paper, shocked when ink flowed from the tip and onto the page. He smiled gently to himself and decided he'd practice his Japanese. It was a language he hadn't written in quite some time, and he guessed he'd probably need to use it sooner rather than later with the predicament he had landed himself in. After writing out the entire kanji, romanji, and hiragana alphabet a few times, he felt the urge to write poetry, something he hadn't done regularly in decades. As he wrote, time continued to tick by slowly. His stomach ached and protested its lack of nourishment, but he found the pain more tolerable with the distraction of writing. He wrote page after page of the same poem, tearing up the pages with undesirable stanzas and setting aside the ones he liked. It wasn't until the sun had begun to set that he stopped, his hand continuing to cramp after using it for hours on end. He stood up and peered through the window, noticing the sun slowly sinking over the horizon. One thing he hated about the mortal realm was the fact that it got dark. In heaven, there were 2 suns, always orbiting around one another. They were both warm and bright, and Izuku could vividly recall the sensation of their soothing rays on his skin, the heat embracing his wings. He frowned as he thought about the fact that he'd never again feel that warmth, see that light. He glanced down at the poem he'd written, a forlorn expression on his face. It was still a rough draft, but it perfectly encased how he felt at that moment. Abandoned, lonely, and without hope. He looked through the window and up to the clouds above. He knew heaven wasn't there, that only God himself could open the rift between the heavenly and mortal realms, but that didn't stop him from feeling slightly homesick. Sure, he'd never particularly liked it up there. He had no fond memories of heaven, no friends or happy stories to tell. But that was still where he'd grown up. It was still the only home he'd ever had, ever known. He may not have been happy, but heaven was familiar ground. Of earth, he knew nothing. He'd been thrown into a completely foreign realm, and he felt bitter about it. Not to mention the fact that the other angels were likely still celebrating because of his exile. Izuku's eyes began to sting as tears gathered at their corners. He quickly wiped at his face, but the tears wouldn't stop. He brought his hands up to his eyes, holding his palms against the streaming current. He bit back a sob as he closed his curtains hurriedly, effectively blocking out the reminder of his old home. "My Lord, God up above," Izuku choked out in his native tongue. I do not wish to come home. All I ask for is forgiveness. I know I'm a sinner, I know I'm dirty, marred by sin and abhorrent. That I'm a vile, despicable Deku, but please, find it in your heart to forgive me," he finished, keening into his hands. He couldn't do this, didn't want to live like this. Was he supposed to just continue living in the mortal realm for however many more millennia he had left? He choked and gasped for air at the thought. The weight of his existence only seemed to become more and more unbearable, a heavy burden pressed against his heart. The wings on his back, the hair on his head, the vantablack of his eyes, they were mere shackles chaining him to a reality he never asked for. The memories of the heavenly realm and its warmth haunted him, making every breath on earth feel like a painful reminder of what he had lost. The endless time ahead of him would be an eternity of loneliness, devoid of the celestial light he had once known. In the mortal realm he was forsaken, bound to wander aimlessly in the depths of his despair for all of eternity. Izuku was trapped. I'm trapped, I'm trapped, I'm trapped," he muttered over and over again. He watched through red-tinged vision as his tears fell and hit the wooden floor below him. The pain in his stomach flared, angry gurgling only serving to make him feel more wretched. "You know what?" He keened through gasping breaths. "Screw forgiveness." He summoned his abyssal blade, holding the humming instrument between his fingers as he contemplated what he should, do with it. This is no way to live, not really, he thought despondently as he continued to keen. He held the blade carefully in his hands. Weapons had always been his specialty. He had 10 that he could summon at any given moment, each one with its own unique ability, an extension of his deadly skill. He'd never got to practice in the combat plaza like everyone else, but that didn't stop him from training on his own. He held the blade to his stomach, breath coming out in short pants. Should I do this? Could he do this? He thought about the kind of life he would lead here on Earth. The way he'd outlive all of his companions, if he even had the chance to make any. He was still a disgusting Deku, after all. How he'd always be an outsider in a world that would never truly be his home. The thought of being forced to live in the mortal realm, of enduring the earthly challenges he was sure to face, it was stifling. The harsh reality of mortality was that every relationship, every connection was bound to end eventually, and Izuku would be left behind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined to exist as a mere observer in a world that would never truly embrace him. Steeling his nerves, he held the blade firm against his abdomen, feeling the wispy blade cutting into his flesh with even the slightest of pressure. "I have to do this, God. I bet you knew that this would happen all along." He pressed the blade deeper into his stomach, wincing as blood began to bubble up from the small wound. "This was your plan, wasn't it?" he asked, hands shaking and breath coming out in quick gasps. "Maybe I'm a Deku," he keened through his tears, "but at least I've lived true to myself to the very end." Just as he was about to slam the blade into his stomach, hands wrapped around both of his arms and pulled them away from his body. "The kid's in there crying again," Shouta said bluntly as he plopped down onto the living room couch. He grabbed the remote and turned on the television, perfectly content to sit there and watch a show while Izuku dealt with his emotions in the room just down the hall. Hisashi grimaced, placing the tests he was grading to the side before making his way over to his husband. "He does that a lot," Hisashi remarked as he took a seat on the cushion next to Shouta. The man refused to speak on the matter as he flipped through channels aimlessly. "Should we talk to him about it?" Hisashi shot a wary glance at the hallway leading to Izuku's room. He'd heard the kid crying a few times now, but he'd been waiting for Izuku to come to them with what was bothering him. "You can," Shouta drawled. He could see Hisashi giving him an incredulous look out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't dare meet his gaze head-on. "Shouta," Hisashi said gravely, unimpressed by his lack of caring. "He's not solely my responsibility. You have to help him, too." At that, Shouta groaned. "What do you want me to do? You know I'm no good with all that feeling crap, let alone adolescent feelings." It was a valid excuse. Hisashi had seen Shouta try to console upset students before, but he'd always had a hard time. "That doesn't mean you shouldn't at least try," he addressed in a stern tone. Shouta turned to him, expression unreadable as ever. "Hisashi," he began, "you're the one who wanted a kid, not me, and don't even get me started on how fucked up the entire situation is. He barely talks, and when he does it's because he's crying. He doesn't eat, and by the sounds coming from his room at night, I'd say he doesn't sleep much either. I mean, he's not even human, for fuck's sake. He's an angel and a traumatized one to boot. They don't exactly make guidebooks on this sort of thing." Hisashi made to interject, but Shouta put a hand up to stop him. "It would be different if he were human, but he's not." Hisashi stared at Shouta with concern clear on his features. "Shoo," he began, but he didn't know what to say to that. Is it really so horrible for him to have a kid around? He thought back to all the arguments they'd had, Shouta's insistence that they don't adopt. Yet Hisashi had kept pushing and pushing. Maybe it was wrong to force this on him. He let out a long sigh. "If you really don't like him being here, I can talk to Nimuri after dinner, ask her to take him in instead." But instead of agreeing right away as Hisashi thought he would, Shouta shook his head. "It's not that I don't want him here, you have to understand something, Zashi. I do want kids, it's just I'm scared I'll mess up. I'm terrified I'll make a life-altering mistake or that I won't be good enough. Izuku needs someone who can guide him and understand him, and I'm not sure I'm up for that. I'm afraid I'll be a failure as a parent," he admitted. Hisashi stared at him, dumbfounded by the explanation. "So, all this time?" Hisashi muttered. Shouta nodded his head. "Yeah, that's the reason I didn't want to adopt. I just felt like I could never measure up as a parent, and now we've got a literal angel as our soon-to-be adopted son. What do you even do with that?" Hisashi gave a wet chuckle, sandwiching Shouta's face between his hands. "We do the best we can," he murmured as he gently pecked his husband on the lips. When Hisashi pulled away to look at him, he registered the look of uncertainty marring Shouta's expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. Shouta hesitated, debating what to say. "I'm just wondering what the best we can would even look like in this situation. We can't read his mind, and he barely talks. How do we help him when we don't even understand what he needs?" Hisashi sighed, running his fingers through Shouta's hair. "We take it one step at a time. Maybe we don't have all the answers right now, but we'll figure it out together. We support him, create a safe space, and maybe, just maybe, he'll start opening up to us." Shouta leaned into Hisashi's touch, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I just don't want to mess this up, Zashi. He's clearly been through enough shit already." Hisashi smiled softly in reassurance. "We won't get it right every time, but we'll be there for him. We've got each other, and that's a good start." He gave Shouta another gentle kiss before he stood. "Now why don't we go prove that you're not a failure as a parent as you help me comfort our kid?" he suggested. Shouta gave a fond eye roll and a small huff as he nodded his head. "Okay," he acquiesced. Shouta followed Hisashi off the couch and the pair approached Izuku's room. They could hear a faint humming coming from behind the closed door and they glanced at one another in confusion. It was Shouta who took the lead and knocked on the door gently. "Kid, you okay in there?" he asked. They could hear him talking in that strange, thousand-voice language, but it didn't sound like a response. He sounded like he was practically choking on the words, small keens layered thick over each vocalization. "We're coming in," Hisashi announced before turning the handle and opening the door. The sight that greeted the pair made their stomachs drop. Izuku was standing in the middle of his room, blood smeared along his face and soaking through his shirt where he held a long, shadowy blade to his stomach. "Izuku!" Hisashi cried out, lunging for the boy and prying his hands away from his stomach. "What the hell are you doing?" Izuku let out a scream, the same one they'd heard in the hospital a week prior. Fighting the urge to cover his ears, Hisashi pried the weapon away from Izuku, but as soon as he managed to wrestle the blade from Izuku's hands, it vanished. "Izuku!" Hisashi said breathlessly now that the frightened screaming had stopped. Izuku up looked at his foster father with a panicked expression, unable to formulate words. Instead, he began to sob loudly, crashing to the floor as if his legs had simply stopped working. "I'm sorry," he muttered. I was just feeling hopeless. I don't know what came over me." He keened into his hands. The shock somewhat wearing off, Hisashi crouched down next to him and gently stroked along the small of his back. "Don't apologize, kid. You have nothing to apologize for." Hisashi embraced him in a reassuring hug, trying to show him that he wasn't angry, just afraid for him. Shouta, who had been standing in the doorway, made his way over to the pair. He slumped down onto the ground and sat cross-legged in front of Izuku. "Are you okay?" he asked, and Izuku nodded shakily. Hisashi pulled away to look the boy over and registered the blood stain on Izuku's shirt with a frown. He reached out his hand, hovering just over Izuku's lower abdomen. "Can I see?" he asked. Izuku was silent for a moment, but eventually he nodded once more. Hisashi pulled Izuku's shirt up slightly to assess the small cut. It was bleeding pretty heavily, but it looked to be superficial in the grand scheme of things. "Okay," Hisashi muttered more to himself than anyone else. "We have a first aid kit in the bathroom. I'm going to go grab it so I can clean and dress your wound." He shot to his feet and hurried from the room, leaving Shouta alone with the boy. Shouta racked his brain for something to say, but like he'd said earlier, he'd never been good at this sort of thing. "That doesn't mean you shouldn't try." At Hisashi's words from before, Shouta steeled his nerves. "He just needs to be comforted right now. I can do that." "I know you said you were always alone in heaven," he began. "But you're not alone anymore, kid. Me, Hisashi, Nimuri, we're all here for you. We'll figure this out, I promise. And I know we got off on a rough start, but you're part of our family now and we care about you." The gold flecks in Izuku's eyes spun rapidly at his words, and Shouta just hoped that meant he was doing a good job. "You don't have to face everything on your own, you know. We'll support you through the tough times and we'll also celebrate the good ones together. Just, you're not alone in this. We care and we're here to help you heal." Izuku sat frozen for a moment, and Shouta began to wonder if he hadn't shown his sincerity well enough. However, just as an apology began to form on the tip of his tongue, Izuku's wings unfurled in a quick motion and he shot forward to envelop the man in a tight hug. "You don't know how much those words mean to me," Izuku mewed against his chest. Shouta could feel Izuku's bloody tears soaking into his shirt, but he couldn't find it within himself to care. Hisashi chose that moment to walk back into the room, shooting Shouta a quick thumbs up behind Izuku's back. It was apparent that he'd been listening in on the conversation, but Shouta could only give a weak smile as he rested his chin atop Izuku's fluffy black curls. "Turns out, the best we can is better than we thought." After a long conversation with Izuku about the importance of telling someone if things got bad again, the trio made their way into the living room. "So you've never watched TV? Seriously?" Hisashi asked with an incredulous look on his face. At Izuku's shake of the head, he said, "Man, heaven sounds boring." Izuku gave a small chuckle at that. "It was," he admitted, "but my experience is completely different from everyone else's, so don't quote me on that." Both Hisashi and Shouta winced at the bitterness in his tone, but neither of the pair said anything about it. Eager to change the subject, Hisashi picked up the remote and turned on the TV. "So if you had to watch a show about high school kids in the pre-hero era who use their quirks to become vigilantes, or a retro show about a man who can run super fast and uses his powers to stop crime, which one would you pick?" "Don't go putting ideas in his head," Shouta grumbled. Izuku smiled faintly at Shouta's response to the question. "The one about the man who can run super fast sounds pretty cool," he said. "The Flash it is." Hisashi said, pumping his fist, and just like that the night calmed and so did Izuku. "He's fine. Are you fucking kidding me right now?" Nimuri scoffed, glaring daggers at the pair across from her. Shouta raised an eyebrow at her vehement use of a swear word, while Hisashi winced at the tone of voice. She'd used to do so. "He needs to see a doctor, a therapist, anyone for what he's going through. He almost killed himself, for fuck's sake." She barked. "Keep your voice down," Shouta reprimanded forcefully as he glanced to the hallway. "Do not tell me to keep my voice down. I'm pissed at you two right now," she hissed. Her eyes narrowed to slits as she asked, "And why didn't you think to tell me this sooner?" Hisashi hesitated before responding. "We were trying to handle it ourselves. We didn't want to burden you or anyone else." Nimuri's anger only intensified at his words. Handle it yourselves. She snapped. He's not just some stray cat you found in the rain. He's a traumatized kid who needs professional help. What the hell were you thinking? What do you want us to do? Get him a therapist who, would have to be informed of Izuku's true origins and would be completely out of their depth because he's literally from an entirely different world, Shouta countered. Nimuri seemed to calm slightly at the logic behind what he was saying. However, they could still practically feel the rage rolling off of her like angry waves crashing against a rocky shore. Just because finding someone to help him would be difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't at least try, Nimuri shot back, her anger palpable. Shouta sighed, shaking his head slightly. Listen, I see where you're coming from, but it would have to be someone we trusted wholeheartedly. Even if they would be out of their depth of field, if we could find someone like that, I'd be willing to consider it. Shouta scratched at the back of his head as he spoke. His ashy perked up suddenly and the pair turned their attention to him. What about Inui? He's a pro-hero, a trusted friend. He's the perfect candidate. Nimuri raised an eyebrow, considering the suggestion. Inui, the Yuyui guidance counselor, she asked. I did hear that he has a knack for caring for strays, she muttered. His ashy grinned. That's the one. He might not have dealt with angels before, then again who has, but he's got a heart of gold. Plus, he's good with handling delicate situations. Until he gets angry, of course, then all hope is lost. Ignoring that last bit, Shouta nodded. You're right. He's someone we can trust. If he's willing to take on the responsibility, it could be just the solution we're looking for. Nimuri's exasperated expression shifted ever so slightly at the apparent solution. Well, if you think he's up for it, then talk to him, but make sure he understands the situation fully. We don't understand the situation fully, and we're his guardians, Hisashi admitted with a huff. Yeah, Nimuri sighed, but you know there would be a more feasible way to ensure he always gets the help he needs whenever the situation may arise. She began. No, Shouta grumbled, cutting off the thought before it could gain traction. He knew where she was going with that line of thinking, and he didn't like it. Oh, why not? She protested. Come on, Shouta, surely you can see the potential in him. She was not above begging for this. Because I can, and I think, no, I know, that he would make an amazing pro one day. Shouta sighed, relenting. Sure, Nimuri, let's entertain the idea of Izuku entering Yuyui for a moment. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He would join with his multiple overpowered quirks, limited knowledge of current human events, and his peculiar appearance. Thinking along these lines, he'd be at an unfair advantage, he'd struggle in most of his classes, and surely suspicion would inevitably arise due to his unnatural appearance. Nimuri frowned, but she couldn't argue with his logic. Either way, she said, I think we should at least talk to him about it. The kid seems smart enough from what I've seen. I'm sure he'd catch up quickly. She shrugged, leaving the suggestion up for further discussion. I don't think it's a bad idea, Hisashi said quietly from his spot beside Shouta. Nimuri nodded in agreement, happy to have someone else on her side in this matter. See, she gloated. But, Hisashi countered, and Nimuri fought the urge to roll her eyes. Shu has some good points. He sent an apologetic look in Nimuri's direction, and the woman let out a long breath. No matter what we end up doing, I think it would be a good idea to get Inui involved either way. Shouta and Hisashi exchanged glances, both content with the decision to involve Hound Dog. That is a wise choice, Nimuri stated as she stood from the table and stretched out her limbs. They'd been seated at the dining table sipping coffee and chatting for a few hours by that point, talking about how their lives were going both inside and outside of work. It hadn't been until the conversation shifted focus to Izuku that the atmosphere grew tense, emotions running high as they discussed potential solutions for the troubled angel in their care. Of course, that was when Hisashi brought up what Izuku had done 2 nights before. The fact that he was alone in his room, yet again, and not on any kind of watch, only served to enrage Nimuri further as she voiced her strong objections. She only calmed down minutely when Shouta told her that they had been watching him, but stopped after Neyamasa's visit earlier in the day when Izuku had admitted that it was more of a spur-of-the-moment occurrence, and that he would talk to someone if he ever felt that way again. Still, their insistence that he was fine caused anger to flare up inside her chest once more, though they'd resolved everything shortly afterwards. Nimuri could feel a noticeable shift in the air, the tension in the room slowly dissipating and leaving the feeling of resolution in its wake. "Did you guys want to hang out for a little longer, or are you ready to kick me to the curb?" Nimuri asked as she pushed her chair in. "You can stay." Shouta followed Nimuri's example and stood as well, not bothering to push in his chair. Hey, it's his house, after all, as he wandered towards the couch. "Why don't I go get Izuku? He's obsessed with Prequarkera superhero shows. We could watch the next episode of The Flash if he's up to it." Hisashi smirked slightly. "It seems as though I've created a monster," he laughed. "I wouldn't be surprised if he's in there watching one of your stupid shows without you," Shouta grumbled dryly. "A monster indeed." "I can get him," Nimuri chirped. She didn't give either of the pair a chance to respond as she hurried down the hallway to Izuku's room. She paused midway, able to hear that same keening she'd come accustomed to from visiting Izuku in the hospital a few times. She let out a sad little sigh and turned around, deciding it would be best for Izuku's family to comfort him, as much as she may want to take that role. "Guys," she drew the pair's attention as she re-entered the living room with a solemn look on her face. "What's wrong?" Hisashi asked with concern, though he had a feeling he knew what the problem was already. "Is he crying again?" he asked and sighed when Nimuri nodded her head slightly. "We've got this," Shouta told her as he stood from the couch, waiting for Hisashi to do the same. Hisashi gave Nimuri a small smile as he passed her on the way to Izuku's room. She returned it with one of her own, even though she looked a bit nauseous in doing so. When the pair reached the end of the hallway, it was Shouta who gently knocked on the boy's door. "Izuku," he said over the sounds of high-pitched keening. "Me and Zashi are coming in okay?" There was no response, but Shouta didn't hesitate in pushing open the door gently regardless. The sight that met them made their stomachs drop. "Izuku?" Hisashi asked in shock as soon he took in the crumpled heap on the ground. Izuku was clutching desperately at his stomach as he all but writhed around in pain. "What's wrong?" Hisashi cried out, alarmed by the state Izuku was in. In a few quick strides, he made it to Izuku's side, crouching down in front of the boy. "Izuku, can you hear me?" he asked in a panicked voice. Izuku let out a groan as he stopped contorting. He let out a high-pitched whine as the pain he felt overpowered his senses. "I lied," Izuku admitted, cardinal tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Hisashi gave him a bemused look. "About what, kiddo?" he asked, anxiety evident in his tone. "About the—" Izuku cut himself off with another keen, his voice breaking and his arms tightening around his abdomen. "About the eating thing," he admitted. "Oh my God," Shouta said, shocked. Why had they simply taken Izuku's words at face value? "He's skin and bones, for heaven's sake. How did we not consider that maybe there was more to the story than, actually, angels don't need to eat?" Cursing to himself, he ran to the kitchen to grab a glass of water and some crackers. When he returned, Izuku was being held close to Hisashi's chest as the man rubbed soothing circles into his back. "Here," Shouta said gently, holding out the sleeve of crackers to Izuku with uncertainty. "I'm so sorry we didn't notice sooner, kid. Why didn't you just tell us the truth?" Izuku sniffled as he pulled away from Hisashi's embrace, staring at the crackers in Shouta's hands with a dismal expression on his face. He let out a soft groan at the pain in his stomach and looked away from the crackers. I can't take that," he muttered, ignoring Shouta's question and wiping at his eyes with the sleeves of his thankfully black sweatshirt. "Sure you can," Hisashi said, grabbing the crackers from Shouta's hands and pulling out a small stack. He gently took one of Izuku's hands and turned it so his palm was facing up, placing the crackers in the center. Izuku shook his head frantically. "No." He cried out but continued to hold the crackers in a firm grip. With his heightened sense of smell, he was practically drooling just from holding them in proximity with his nose. I don't know what's wrong with me," he muttered, thinking about how just last fall he'd gone 6 months without eating. He let out a high keen and squeezed his eyes shut as his stomach gave a particularly painful stab. The adults looked at one another, confused by what they were witnessing. "Izuku, if you have problems eating, we can work through that," Hisashi said gently. His eyes flew open at that, the flecks dancing on the surface beginning to spin frantically as the angel stared at him incredulously, unable to believe what he was insinuating. What are you talking about?" Izuku spluttered indignantly. "I'm not some teenage mortal with an eating disorder. I just can't take your food because it would be—" Izuku trailed off, too embarrassed to continue. "Because it would be what?" Shouta inquired gently. Izuku averted his gaze, his shattered irises spinning more languidly now. Because it would be sinful, he finally admitted, but neither Hisashi nor Shouta knew what the boy meant. How would that be sinful? Hisashi questioned, watching Izuku wince in pain. Because, he hissed, because you both work hard to make your money. I can't just take what amounts to the fruits of all your efforts and labor. As if on cue, Izuku's stomach let out a loud grumble and he groaned. Hisashi winced and Shouta frowned. Kid, it's not that big of a deal, Shouta stated matter-of-factly. And you need to eat. I don't know much about angel biology, but when humans don't eat, they die. Izuku shook his head frantically, shoving the crackers he was holding into Hisashi's chest. I can't, he lamented. Izuku, it's not a sin, Shouta reassured as he crouched down to meet the boy on the floor. But it's your hard-earned money. I'd be burdening you, Izuku insisted. Hisashi shook his head, wrapping his arms around the boy and inadvertently crushing the crackers between his fingers. Izuku gasped but made no move to get away, so Hisashi held him tighter for a moment before letting him go and pulling away. Looking the boy in the eyes, he said, Listen, Izuku, we really don't mind. It's not about the money, it's about ensuring you're healthy and happy. That's not possible if you won't eat. Izuku looked down, uncertain. Shouta placed a hand on the angel's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. You're our kid now, Izuku. Taking care of you is quite literally our full-time job, and part of that job is making sure you're healthy and getting something to eat when you're hungry. Hisashi nodded in agreement. And you're not a burden, kid. You're a part of this little makeshift family we've got going on. The gold of Izuku's eyes danced brilliantly as red tears streamed down his face. Okay, he muttered, clutching his stomach all the more tightly. Okay, Hisashi echoed. Okay, I'll eat something. And thank God for that, both Hisashi and Shouta thought in unison. They watched Izuku pick up a cracker and nibble on the end uncertainly, but after that first bite, he'd all but inhaled the full sleeve, and then a second one. The room filled with a warm atmosphere as they listened to Izuku munch away on the crackers. He was so ravenous the pair wouldn't be shocked if he hadn't eaten in weeks. Little did they know it had been months. The bell rang throughout the building, signaling the end of the school day. Shouta told his class of 10, the only ones who had remained throughout the school year, to pack up and get out, as he had business to attend to. When the classroom was finally empty of students, he made his way into the hallway and toward where he knew Ryo's office was. After walking through the bustling hallways for an indeterminate amount of time, he eventually made it to the room with the label Guidance Counselor on a silver plaque beside the door. He waited a few moments for Hisashi and Nimuri to show up, sure that Ryo could smell him and was getting suspicious. He tensed at the thought. When he spotted the pair speeding down the hallway and in his direction, he visibly deflated. This entire situation is nerve-wracking. You guys ready to do this? Nimuri asked as she finally made it to Shouta's side. As ready as I'll ever be, Hisashi muttered, sounding uncertain. There was a good chance Ryo wouldn't believe them, and it wasn't as if they had any substantial proof aside from Izuku himself. Nodding his head in affirmation, Shouta rapped on the door 1, 2, 3 times. Come in, a gravelly voice replied from the other side. The trio looked at one another before steeling their nerves and walking into the office. Good evening, Inui. Hisashi smiled cheerfully at the man to mask his nerves. He just hoped Ryo didn't write them all off as lunatics without so much as hearing them out. Hello, Yamada, Kayama, Aizawa, what can I help you with today? He asked. He set the papers he'd been looking at to the side so he could give them his full attention. He didn't miss the nervous expressions on all of their faces, though it was always hard to read Shouta's. If you don't know what you're looking for, that is. Has something happened? Is everyone okay? Ryo's eyes narrowed in suspicion as he scented the air for a possible threat he may have missed. No, nothing like that, Nimuri reassured, but there's something we need to talk to you about. Nimuri hesitated. Ryo noted her serious gaze, yet at the same time her body language displayed a hint of nervousness. Yes, just what is this about, he wondered. Well, Hisashi began. About a week ago now, a boy with wings crash-landed in our backyard. He scratched at his head, unsure of how to continue. He was taken to the hospital, and while we were there with him, we learned that Nimuri trailed off. Shouta let out a long breath through his nostrils. Someone has to come out and say it. The boy turned out to be an angel, and he's now living in Hisashi's and my care. He drawled. Ryo stared at them incredulously. Of all the things he'd been expecting to hear, that was not one of them. "Pardon," he stammered. "His name is Izuku. He was exiled from heaven and had no place to go, so we took him in," Shouta stated. Ryo turned in his desk chair to look at his calendar. "No, it's definitely not April Fool's Day." "Okay," he blinked. "And you're telling me this, why?" Nimuri stepped forward, her expression filled with concern. "Because he's traumatized, Inui. He has scars all over his body, he barely talks, and barely leaves his room for anything. For fuck's sake, he thought that eating Shouta and Hizashi's food was sinful because it was like stealing from them. And of course, the other day he tried to." Shouta cleared his throat as he gave Nimuri a moment to compose herself. "Hizashi and I walked in on him pressing a blade to his stomach. From what it looked like, if we were even a second later, he may not be alive right now." Shouta's stomach churned at the thought. He shuddered. "I almost lost my son before getting the chance to know him." Ryo's expression was unreadable as he glared over his folded hands at the trio. "And I'm guessing you want me to counsel this angel?" he asked in a subdued voice. "That was the plan, yes. We wanted to go to someone we knew we could trust with this secret. I know you wouldn't understand his struggles, but surely you can help in some way, right?" Hizashi asked hopefully. "I'm not sure that I fully buy this story, but yes, I would be willing to counsel the boy pro bono if everything you said was true, of course." The group shared looks of relief, not believing their luck. Just as they thought everything had gone to plan, the door behind them creaked on its hinges as it opened slowly. The group turned toward the source of the noise, shocked to see Principal Nedzu himself standing in the doorway. "That is a very interesting story," he said. "Please do tell me more." After they'd begrudgingly explained everything that had happened in the past week, as if they had a choice in the matter, Nedzu hummed in thought. "That is a very sad story indeed." He hopped down from Ryo's desk and landed with a small huff on the ground. "I feel for the kid even in knowing so little about him," he muttered as if in thought. Nedzu began to pace back and forth, considering the situation. "Well, it seems you've all found yourselves in quite the predicament, particularly you two." He pointed towards Hizashi and Shouta respectively. "I can only assume that taking care of an angel is no small feat, especially one with such a troubled past. However, I think I may have a solution that could benefit everyone involved." Nedzu paused, looking at the trio with his sharp, intelligent eyes. "I propose that if this boy, Izuku, truly is an angel, that he attend Yuyui. Our institution has a history of nurturing unique talents and providing a supportive environment. Given the endless possibilities of his power and the delicate nature of his situation, I believe Yuyui could offer him the education and support he needs while ensuring his safety." Shouta looked ready to argue, but Nedzu put a paw up to silence him. "Yuyui is equipped to handle students with various quirks, and we prioritize the well-being of our students above all else. With our experienced staff team, specialized facilities, and a community that embraces diversity, it may just be the ideal place for Izuku to find the sense of belonging he needs to heal from his past traumas." Nedzu's proposal hung in the air, awaiting the response of the boy's guardians. "Well," Hizashi trailed off, not knowing what to say. Instead, he turned to Shouta, who had his eyes locked on the ground. "Shoo," he murmured. "It isn't a bad idea. Think of all the accommodations he'd have here, all the friends he could make. We can't keep him cooped up at the house forever. He's been alone for far too long." He trailed off, leaving Shouta to sigh heavily at his words. He contemplated the offer for a moment before straightening up and giving Nedzu a steely gaze. "Fine," he acquiesced. "But only if that's what he wants." Nedzu hummed in agreement and rubbed his tiny paws together. "Of course, Aizawa, he will be getting in on my recommendation as well, so no need to worry about tests of any kind." And so it became official. If Izuku agreed to it in a month, he would join Yuyui. The wheels were in motion. Shouta, Hizashi, and Nimuri entered the house wearing matching expressions of concern. They took off their shoes by the door and stalked over to the living room, getting situated on the couches. Shouta called out for Izuku once they were all comfortable, his voice echoing through the eerily quiet house. After a moment of silence, the boy wandered out of his room hesitantly, unsettled by the deathly quiet. When he entered the living room, he reached up to his chest as he looked at the trio in question. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, nervousness filling his voice as he spoke. "Why don't you come and take a seat on the couch for a moment, Izuku?" Hisashi suggested as he gazed at him with apprehension. Izuku's face scrunched up as he wandered towards where they were seated, pondering what this could be about. If the burning emotions he could feel swirling around in his chest were anything to go by, it wouldn't be anything good. However, he noted that Nimuri's feelings of trepidation weren't quite as intense. He took a seat on the couch, looking at them imploringly. "Is everything okay?" He inquired, anxious feelings of his own beginning to wrap around his heart as he looked at each one of them, trying to grasp the severity of the situation. Thoughts began to race through Izuku's mind like a storm. Are they going to get rid of me? Have they finally stopped caring about me? What have I done wrong? His breath suddenly quickened as he stared at them in desperation, hoping what he thought wasn't the case. I'm sorry if I've done anything to upset you," he stammered. "I don't want to be a burden and I can leave if you want, but I would do anything to change your mind if at all possible. And I know I stay in my room a lot of the time, that I'm never really around, but please don't get rid of me. I'll do better, I promise. I'll be quiet and I won't eat much and I'll stay out of your way. Just please don't leave me alone again." His voice wavered with a mix of fear and pleading as he poured out his anxieties. His eyes filled with blood and a single tear rolled down his cheek. The group stared at him in horror, wondering where he'd gotten the impression they wanted him gone from. What?" Hisashi spluttered. "Of course not, Izuku. It's nothing like that, I promise." Izuku took in a shuddering breath as he reached up to wipe at his tears. "Oh, thank the heavens," he said wetly. "I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions. I'm just not used to anyone wanting me around. I thought I'd done something wrong, that I wasn't good enough, because I've never been good enough." He let out a barely audible keen, but the trio heard. "Izu," Nimuri said as she reached out to him, hesitating. "You are good enough, kid. We wouldn't stop caring about you just because you're struggling. Like Hisashi said the other day, you're part of the family now. You won't get away from us so easily." Shouta had stood up midway through his declaration and was now crouched in front of Izuku, offering him what comfort he could. He placed a tender hand on his shoulder and the boy gazed at him with a broken expression. "Izuku," Hisashi added, his voice gentle. "We're here for you, always. You don't need to apologize or feel like a burden. You're important to us." Nimuri nodded in agreement. "You're not alone, kid. We care about you no matter what." Izuku, who was overwhelmed by his emotions, leaned into Shouta's touch, feeling the warmth and reassurance. His tears continued to fall, but this time they were more of relief, only slightly tinged with sadness. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice quiet. "Don't be, kiddo." Hisashi smiled gently as Izuku turned to him. The angel looked forlorn, but at the same time somewhat comforted. "The way you feel about yourself is actually one of the things we wanted to talk to you about," Shouta said. Izuku nodded and looked at him inquisitively, prompting him to continue. "There's a man at Yuyui, a trusted friend of ours who works as a counselor. We discussed your situation with him and asked him to do some sessions with you, to which he agreed." Izuku's eyes widened minutely at the information. "A counselor?" he questioned, intrigued, like a therapist. Shouta nodded his head, getting up and stalking back to his seat now that Izuku had calmed down. There was still blood smeared along his cheeks, but he was no longer actively crying. "Yes," Shouta said. "They're basically the same thing." Izuku nodded minutely at his words, looking to the ground as uncertainty clouded his expression. "I mean, if you guys think it's necessary, I'll do it," he said hesitantly. "But I don't really like talking about myself much." "That's okay," Hisashi reassured. "You can start slow, go at your own pace. We're not asking you to divulge all your past traumas, we just want you to talk a little about how you feel, make sure you're okay." He nudged his shoulder against Izuku's. "Think you can do that, champ?" Izuku gave a lopsided smile and nodded his head. He wiped away a stray tear from his earlier outburst as he said, "If you think that it will be good for me, then of course I will." The adults felt relieved in getting the most important hurdle out of the way, impressed with the trust in them Izuku had displayed. "If you guys think it's necessary, if you think it will be good for me." Hisashi glanced at Shouta, noticing that even he had a relieved smile on his face. "That's great," Hisashi said happily. "But there's one other thing," Nimuri faltered with hesitation. Izuku could feel the apprehensiveness they all felt replacing their relief as Nimuri continued. "When we talked to the counselor, Hound Dog, We ended up being overheard. Izuku tensed. Did someone bad overhear? He inquired, concern etching his features. Not bad, per se, Nimuri hedged. It's just that some information might have reached the wrong ears. Izuku's expression shifted from concern to anxious. Who overheard? He whispered nervously. The principal, Nedzu, Hisashi stated, and we think he may want you as his exclusive student. He froze at the look on Izuku's face. It was one of nervous dread. But it's not that bad. You may just have extra classes or something similar. I'm not too sure, to be honest. He's never taken a student under his wing before, let alone made a recommendation for one to join the school. He trailed off. Not that bad. Shouta thought with a scoff. A child with centuries' worth of knowledge and a sadistic rat that may or may not want to overthrow the government is not a good mix for anyone's sanity. He gazed at Izuku skeptically. Not that bad? Yeah, right? Izuku mulled the information over in his head. He wasn't used to so much attention, though by the sour emotions he could feel from the others, he wasn't sure whether or not it was a good thing. So I have to join this school? He asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. You don't have to, not if you don't want to, Shouta said. He looked at Izuku with understanding. Nedzu may have his reasons, but the choice is ultimately yours. If you're not comfortable with it, then that's okay. Shouta's gaze held a silent reassurance. He wanted to make sure Izuku knew that his feelings came first. Izuku thought about it for a moment before he said, I've never had the opportunity to go to school. In heaven, I was shunned and banned from interacting with children my age. I've always wanted to get a proper education, but that could be because I wasn't allowed to in the first place. After all, we always want what we can't have. The mood of the room instantly darkened as they listened to Izuku speak. They still didn't know what Izuku had done or why he was treated so poorly in heaven, but they assumed it had nothing to do with the angel himself. He was too pure, too innocent to do anything deserving of being treated so horribly. They believed that the reasoning lay in Izuku being different, as he had initially stated after waking up in the hospital. Does that mean you want to? Hisashi asked. Izuku nodded his head. I know from what little you've said about Yuyui that it's a hero school, and I don't exactly know how I feel about that, but yeah, I want to go to school. I want the chance to be normal, even if it's not in heaven. Shouta nodded his head, feeling a bit bitter. Well, if that's what you want, then you start next month. Oh, Izuku, you're going to be a hero, Nimuri said as she leaned over and hugged him. Izuku flinched at the contact, but gently wrapped his arms around her in return. Yeah, I'm going to be a hero. Nimuri smiled. And even if he doesn't know how to feel about it, he'll make a damn good pro one day. Just like Hisashi and Shouta, his fathers. You ready, kiddo? Hisashi asked as they all got out of the car. Nimuri was with them as well as she carpooled with Shouta and Hisashi to work every morning. As ready as I'll ever be, Izuku gulped nervously. Hisashi smiled and ruffled his hair, causing Izuku to scowl. Don't look so mad, your hair is a mess anyway. He laughed and pulled his hand away. Me and Zashi are going to be working in the teacher's lounge. You've got 2 hours before homeroom starts. Shouta drawled. Izuku looked up at him and smiled despite his nerves. I have my notebook, I'm just going to write poetry and practice my Japanese writing, he replied, wringing his hands together as he spoke. Hisashi smiled at him fondly. Don't look so nervous, kid. Shu is your homeroom teacher and you've got me for English, and I'm sure you'll make plenty of friends in no time, so you probably won't even need us soon enough. He bumped Izuku lightly as they walked through the deserted school grounds, and Izuku gave Hisashi a sweet smile. You're right, I have nothing to worry about, he said, but as soon as they entered the foyer, a small mouse, or was it a bear, perhaps a dog, approached them with a calculating gaze. He looked Izuku up and down, clearly assessing the angel. I've been waiting for you to arrive. He greeted them in a cheerful tone. You are Izuku, I presume? He asked as he watched Izuku intently. Izuku could only fidget in response, his wings twitching slightly and the gold of his eyes spinning rapidly. I have nothing to worry about, I have nothing to worry about, I have nothing to worry about. Why so nervous? Nedzu asked bluntly, cutting off Izuku's repetitive mantra. Oh, he squeaked out, running a pale hand through his curly black hair. I'm not exactly used to having all this attention on me, you know. You also have a lot of power and you want me to be your student, so that's it's kind of scary to me, he muttered. Nedzu laughed heartily, making Izuku jump. There's no need to fear me, Izuku. I simply found your situation, as well as what you are, to be interesting. He placed a paw on Izuku's calf, giving him a reassuring smile. And we have much more in common than you may believe. Izuku gave a nervous laugh, doubting what he was saying, though he could feel the genuineness of the Chimera's words in his chest, so he didn't say anything on the matter. Why don't you come down to my office, Izuku? We have much to talk about. He turned away from the boy and began walking, but Izuku stayed rooted to the spot. Somehow he felt that he didn't have a choice in the matter. Nedzu turned and eyed him expectantly. Do come along, he said. Izuku glanced at his fathers nervously. He could feel their apprehension buzzing in his chest. Yes, sir, he muttered as he hurried after the Chimera, fidgeting his fingers the whole way. Once the pair had disappeared up the stairs, Shouta let out a long sigh. I don't like this, he muttered darkly. I'm sure we have nothing to worry about, Hisashi replied as the trio began making their way to their respective classrooms. We have everything to worry about. It's Nedzu with a literal angel by his side. I wouldn't be surprised if, by the end of the year, he turns Izuku into some sort of child soldier who lives only to do his bidding. Nimuri chuckled at his words. You really are worried about him, aren't you? She questioned with a fond smile. I'd be worried about anyone whom Nedzu decided to take under his wing. He may be a genius, but he's also insane. Nimuri shook her head. He'll be fine, Shu. I genuinely hope so. So, Izuku, we've discussed how you were shunned and treated poorly during your time in heaven, how you were always alone, and how God didn't listen to your prayers. You explained that you were treated like this because you are inherently different from the other angels. You've also told me that you hold much more power than your peers in heaven, and that your abilities are much greater. There was a gleam in Nedzu's eyes as he said, Care to explain what those differences are, as well as what abilities you hold? Izuku tensed, looking apprehensive. His eyes began to spin languidly as he glanced to the ground in nervousness. Well, angels are supposed to have white hair, white and gold eyes with no separation in the pupils, and white wings. He paused, looking sad as he muttered, and as you can see, I look completely different. Nedzu hummed in sympathy and nodded his head, though he was much more interested in the latter half of his question. And your abilities? He asked. Izuku blanched. That's another part of the differences. For starters, every angel can summon celestial weapons from their feathers, though they have no special properties to them besides functioning in whatever form they take. There's a celestial blade, bow, staff, shurikens, gauntlets, a whip, crossbow, dagger, shield, and spear. None of them have real names besides what forms they take, but I've named mine based on what abilities they have. Nedzu's eyes narrowed. Go on, he prompted. Well, there's my abyssal blade, which can cut through anything. It severs the connection between atoms. Then there's my singularity bow, which can create black holes upon contact, even if caught. My ephemeral staff can control the time of living creatures in a controlled area. My cosmic shurikens can open rifts in reality and disorient my opponents as it shows them their worst, most deeply rooted fears, even if they aren't aware of them. My nebula gauntlets, which absorbs cosmic energy and releases it in controlled blasts upon contact. My void whip, which is a flexible tendril of void energy that can be used to trip, disarm, or strike my opponents. It also induces a temporary feeling of weightlessness, which can disorient my enemy as well. Then there's my stellar crossbow, a weapon imbued with the power of the stars, which angels are born from, and explodes in bursts upon contact. I've never used it on another living being, though, because it not only causes physical damage, but spiritual damage as well. I have my quantum dagger, which can phase through solid matter at will. My temporal shield, which temporarily slows down any non-living object coming in my direction. And lastly, there's my eclipse spear, which when slammed into the ground causes a great area of darkness that only I can see through, and that causes others to experience a disconnection from their surroundings. He paused, waiting for Nedzu's reaction. The Chimera looked at him, a grin stretching across his face. Those all sound very powerful, Izuku. Is that all, or is there more? He asked, his eyes glinting. Izuku hesitated. He was reluctant to share more, but there was a sense of trust building in the conversation. After a moment of silence had passed between the pair, he decided to reveal a bit more about his abilities, cautiously selecting the information to share. I can manipulate space and time, even without my staff or shield, but doing it without my weapons gives me a headache. I can also do this thing I call void walking, where I travel through a vast black space from one spot to the next in a short period. The only drawback is that I have to go to the place I want to void walk to. I'm also able to, I believe humans call it, astral project. I can separate my spiritual form from my physical body. This also works on others. Then there's my ability to manipulate gravity in a short distance. I can shape reality to my will, but the results are unpredictable at best, so I don't use it too often. The last ability I have is to make my form intangible. Those are the big ones anyway. The rest are fairly useless, like being able to silence people at will or make people tell the truth. He finished. Nedzu was looking at him incredulously, unable to believe such a small vessel could hold so much power. That is truly incredible, Izuku. I wish to see these abilities in person sometime soon. He picked up his tea and took a contemplative sip, eyeing the boy thoughtfully. And you said that the other angels are not capable of such feats. Izuku shook his head. They can control the feathers of their wings, much like the hero, what was his name? He trailed off. Hawks. Nedzu supplied helpfully. Izuku nodded. Yeah, him. I actually wouldn't be surprised if he had an angelic heritage. After all, I'm not the first angel to be exiled to Earth. Nedzu grinned, his little nose twitching. No, but you must certainly be the first of your caliber. Why heaven was so indifferent in seeing you depart is a mystery to me. You have quite a reservoir of potential, Izuku. Nedzu hopped down from his chair and made his way over to the boy. But moving along, there is one thing that has been bothering me about what I was told of you. He gazed up at Izuku with his beady eyes, frowning. Izuku gulped. What is it? He asked. Nedzu pondered how to put this gently, as surely it was a sore spot for the boy. I have been informed that you have scars which are quite extensive. His expression was soft as he watched Izuku glance away. May I ask what they are from? Izuku's expression darkened, the specks in his eyes spinning rapidly. No, you may not, he said in a quiet, icy voice. Are we done here? I wanted to write some poetry before school starts for the day, he said as he glowered at the ground. Not wanting to push or pry, Nedzu nodded gently. You may go, Izuku, if that is what you wish to do. I am in no way forcing you to be here, Nedzu stated. Izuku stood with clenched fists, which Nedzu could see were shaking, and he exited the room. Once gone, Nedzu sat down and began to write out everything Izuku had told him, both of heaven as well as his powers. However, he couldn't get his mind off of the look on Izuku's face, the way he had shaken, or the implication that whatever had happened to him, been done to him, was deeply, horribly wrong. There's a story there, Nedzu thought, and I will find out what it is. Izuku had been writing in his notebook for half an hour when someone entered the room. He glanced up to see a boy with blue hair and glasses looking at him with a shocked expression. Izuku could feel the mix of surprise and curiosity buzzing in his chest, but he couldn't tell if it was because of his appearance or something else. Good morning, fellow classmate. It is good to see someone who is so diligent in being prepared for class. I had assumed I'd be the earliest one. He laughed while chopping his arms almost robotically. Izuku gave him a stunned expression. Oh, no, actually. Our homeroom teacher is my guardian, so I had to come in early with him, he said slowly, gauging the boy's reaction. Ah, that makes sense then, he said, walking up to where Izuku was seated. He stretched out his arm and Izuku stared at it, unsure of what the gesture meant. My name is Ida Tenya. It is nice to meet you. He smiled, still holding out his hand for Izuku to shake. Izuku hesitated on what to do and took his outstretched hand, hoping he was doing the right thing. Tenya's grin widened as he shook Izuku's hand up and down vigorously. Izuku flinched and wondered if this was a normal occurrence, and if it is, just why. I'm Aizawa Yamada Izuku, but you can call me by my first name. It's a pleasure. He matched Tenya's wide smile with a much weaker one, but it was a smile nonetheless. The pleasure is all mine, Tenya said as he released Izuku's hand. The angel fought the urge to cradle his hand to his chest, genuinely confused as to why Tenya had done that. So your parents are teachers here. I recognize the name Yamada as our English teacher. Tenya smiled down at Izuku, and he could feel the genuine warmth coming from the boy. Are all humans in this realm so nice? He wondered. Yeah, they took me in about a month ago now, so it's a pretty recent development. He watched as Tenya tensed, a feeling of remorse replacing the previous warmth. Oh, he said, that must have been a big change. Tenya wanted to ask what had happened to Izuku's parents but refrained. It would be extremely unbecoming to ask such a personal, sensitive question, especially as we've only just met. Izuku nodded his head. Yeah, everything's been pretty hectic since I was placed in their care. He cursed himself for nearly coming out and saying, exiled. You've been interacting with another human for all of 2 minutes and you almost say something incriminating. Pathetic. He cringed at the thought. I can only imagine, Tenya said solemnly. He sensed the boy's unease at the topic of conversation and searched for a way to change the subject. He studied Izuku for a moment before shifting his gaze to the notebook sitting on the desk in front of him, its pages filled with scribbled-out words and methodical sentences. Your dedication to your studies is quite evident, Tenya remarked, his eyes scanning the chaotic contents of Izuku's notebook. Izuku's face heated up as he hid the page, not wanting the boy to see he was embarrassingly writing poetry. Yeah, he spluttered. Tenya smiled at him, not understanding the situation but finding Izuku's actions comedic nonetheless. If you ever need assistance in catching up on class material or if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I am here to help my fellow classmates excel academically. He offered, sincerity evident in his tone. Izuku managed a small smile, appreciating the gesture. Thank you, Ida. I might take you up on that offer sometime. As the conversation continued, Tenya shared information about the various activities and events at Yuyui. He mentioned the rigorous training, the practical exams, and the upcoming sports festival that the entire school eagerly anticipated every year. Izuku listened attentively, absorbing the details as Tenya continued on. Despite his initial nervousness about coming here, Tenya's friendly demeanor and willingness to help put him at ease. The way Tenya talked to him, like he was a normal person, not something to be hated or scorned, made Izuku feel a sense of belonging. It was something he hadn't felt before. After talking for a while, the door to the classroom slammed open, causing Izuku to jump and look toward the source of the noise in fear. But instead of a threat, it was just a boy. He had blonde, spiky hair and wore a deep frown as he glanced at the pair who had stopped talking to look his way. "The fuck you looking at?" he asked with a scowl, his tone filled with irritation. "You shouldn't swear. Also, you are being extremely rude right now." Tenya exclaimed while chopping his arms wildly. "Yeah, so, what's your point, four eyes?" He scoffed as he stomped into the room and took a seat in front of Izuku. "Oh, heavens up above, please don't tell me that's his assigned seat." Izuku didn't think he'd be able to cope with having to sit behind this angry, delinquent-looking boy all year. Izuku watched as the blonde put his feet up on the desk, and Izuku felt Tenya's emotions flare intensely. "Do you have no manners?" he scolded. "Put your feet down." "Oh, please, get off your high horse. You ain't a teacher, so don't tell me what to do, you fucking extra," he retorted with an exaggerated eye roll. "Excuse me, were you raised in a barn?" Tenya's arms began chopping up and down more violently, but the boy he was addressing didn't seem to care in the slightest. It seemed as though Izuku had gotten a harsh slap in the face from reality. No, all humans are not kind. He looked away from the argument nervously. He didn't have it in him to help his new classmate. Was it too soon to call him a friend? So instead he watched the clock, anxiously waiting for the next 30 minutes to pass. Class can't start soon enough, he thought. He just hoped that the appearance of a teacher and the distraction of lessons would be enough to shift the boy's attitude. Eventually, other students began to pour into the classroom, and Tenya had begrudgingly left the blonde boy alone. Izuku would be lying if he said the boy didn't scare him. Then again, so do a lot of things in the mortal realm, he thought with a sigh. "Oh my God!" Someone yelled, startling Izuku with both their volume and casual use of his lord's name. He looked around for the source of the noise, noticing a brunette with pink cheeks bounding up to him. "Hi," she cooed. Hi." Izuku replied, unsure of why she felt so excited. "You look so cool," she said cheerfully, leaning over his desk to peer into his gold and Vanta-black eyes. He shifted his gaze away from her, unsure of what to say to that. She reached out and hovered a hand by one of his large black and gold wings, hesitating before she asked, "Can I touch them?" Izuku was taken aback by her enthusiasm, genuinely surprised that she was so captivated by the way he looked. "Sure," he said nervously, his wings twitching slightly before spreading out so she had better access to them. She ran a hand along the spine of his wings, her touch gentle and tender. He'd never had anyone touch his wings so softly before, and somehow it felt oddly comforting. Your feathers are very soft. She touched his other wing and Izuku shuddered. His wings were sensitive, okay. I love them, she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. At the words, Izuku's eyes stung. She loves them. No one had ever said such things about his wings before. They were a mark of sin, something to be scorned and looked down upon. The simple act of appreciation caught him off guard, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness in his chest. In that moment, the weight of his past, the rejection he'd faced, pressed a little heavier on his shoulders. He couldn't help it as red tears filled his eyes, their golden flecks beginning to spin. Your eyes, the girl shouted, drawing the class's attention to the pair. They're bleeding and spinning. She ran to grab a tissue from the teacher's desk as the class gathered around them. Dude, are you okay? A boy with what looked to be a black lightning bolt in his otherwise blonde hair asked worriedly. You should go see the nurse, recovery girl, someone else said. The brunette quickly returned to Izuku, holding out a tissue for him to take. He grabbed it hurriedly and pressed it to his eyes, his nerves spiking as the attention of nearly his whole class was drawn to him. It's normal, he assured them, trying to ease their concerns. It doesn't look normal, a boy with curly purple hair much like his own drawled. He shook his head frantically. It is, I swear, I cry blood. He admitted embarrassedly. His cheeks warmed at the fact that he just admitted that, and he only wanted to cry harder when he saw the blonde delinquent from earlier glaring at him. What? A red-haired boy exclaimed as he, along with the rest of the class, stared in shock. But why are you crying in the first place? A girl with a nasally voice and long green hair tied in a bow asked. I get emotional very easily, he admitted hoarsely. He reached up to his chest as the brunette who had been talking to him earlier began to feel guilty, obviously thinking his tears were her fault. Listen, I swear it's normal and that I'm okay, so just please. Give me some space, he wanted to say, but found himself faltering. He squeezed his eyes shut as his wings curled up slightly. He didn't like this. A boy with a scar on his left eye seemed to understand his discomfort and stepped in. Guys, back up. You're clearly scaring him, he directed. The class finally seemed to take in the discomfort etched across Izuku's features, looking ashamed as they did as he said. They took a few steps back so they no longer crowded around Izuku's desk. The angel opened his eyes and gave the two-toned boy an appreciative look, to which he nodded his head in return. That's hella weird, a pink girl said, her curiosity evident. But also kinda cool. It matches the look you've got going on. She pointedly glanced at his wings before she backed away and took a seat at her desk. Izuku watched as the blonde boy turned around in his seat, and thanked the heavens for that. Before the class could erupt into more questions, the door to the room opened, and they all glanced over to see a man, Caterpillar, in a sleeping bag, scooting into the room, effectively silencing the class. What the? Someone muttered as the man wormed his way inside. He made it to the teacher's podium and unzipped his sleeping bag from the inside, standing and glaring at them all. It was only Izuku and Tenya who noticed Shouta's eyes linger on Izuku slightly longer than everyone else. Good morning, everyone. I am your homeroom teacher, Aizawa, he said in a dry voice. I will make one thing clear from the get-go. I do not tolerate nonsense, and I will not hesitate to expel anyone who steps out of line or who I deem to have no potential. The class stared at him in horror, realizing the uncompromising standards they would be expected to meet. No hero becomes great without facing adversity, and I am here to prepare you for the challenges ahead. The path to becoming a hero is not easy, and if you can't handle my training methods, you won't make it far in this profession. Those of you who are serious about training their quirks and skills will find success under my guidance. The rest will be weeded out. There were audible gulps around the room, and Izuku fought the urge to shudder. Now, I want you all to put on your gym uniforms and meet me in the field outside. We will be doing a quirk apprehension test so I can gauge what I'm working with this year, he stated as he began to walk toward the door. But sir, someone called out, what about orientation? Shouta turned to look at the class and they all tensed, feeling a sharp chill work its way up their spines. This is a school for heroics. Heroes don't have time for frivolous things such as orientation. If you're serious about this, prove it on the field, he said sternly. Now let's go. And with that, the class grabbed their uniforms and hurried after their teacher. Man, Mr. Aizawa is scary. The blonde boy with a lightning bolt mark in his hair shuddered. You're telling me, if he was serious, I'll probably be expelled by the time the test is over. A boy with strange elbows groaned loudly. Tenya began chopping his arms as Izuku took off his shirt. Do not sell yourself short. I'm sure you will excel here at Yuyui. You made it into the hero course, after all. Yeah, but I barely scraped by with enough villain points to pass. And don't even get me started on the practical, he lamented as he pulled his pants off. It was just as Izuku did the same that his red-headed classmate took notice of him standing in the corner trying to change discreetly, away from everyone's prying eyes and questions. Whoa, dude, those are some gnarly scars, he said, looking horrified. Are they scars? They're golden. The room's focus shifted to Izuku, who fanned out his wings to cover his body so that only his head was sticking out. He noticed the intense gaze from the spiky-haired angry boy from earlier, who was scowling at him in scrutiny. However, even with his angry gaze piercing him with its intensity, he could feel the boy's genuine concern flood his chest, along with everyone else. It's nothing, he muttered as he pulled on his pants while hiding behind his wings. However, he ran into a problem when he had to maneuver his shirt on, having no choice but to unfurl his wings and thread the massive appendages through the holes in the back of his uniform. That doesn't look like nothing, a boy with a large tail poking out behind him said in concern. What happened? He continued. Izuku shook his head frantically, unwilling to answer. He hadn't even disclosed what caused his scars to his guardians. He wasn't about to go into his tragic backstory marred with torture and experimentation with a group full of strangers. He managed to get his shirt on as quickly as he could, ignoring his classmates as they continued to ask questions. Once he was done changing, he rushed from the room, leaving a stunned group behind in his wake. Dude, that's messed up, the redhead muttered, looking solemn. I wonder what happened. They looked pretty bad, the boy with weird elbows added. With that, the changing room fell into contemplative silence as the boys of 1A thought about their winged classmate. A certain boy with dual quirks could only stare after the door from which Izuku had just exited, a knot of worry tightening in his chest. Whatever it was, I hope he's okay. Good you're all here. We can finally begin, Shouta drawled as he glared at the class assessingly. Now, as most of you are probably aware, the national averages for physical fitness tests are based on records where you're not allowed to use your quirks. I assume you all did this in junior high, correct? He asked. A chorus of yes, Mr. Aizawa's echoed from everyone, and Shouta sighed audibly. It's not rational, and why the Ministry of Education continues to procrastinate in changing their flawed system is beyond me, he grumbled. Either way, unlike in junior high, today you will be using your quirks for this test. He scanned the class, his gaze lingering on each student. He happened to notice a few of the boys glancing at Izuku in concern, and if he had to hazard a guess, he assumed it was because they'd seen his scars in the changing room. He sighed once more, his displeasure with the situation making itself known. Bakugo Katsuki, he said, and the boy stepped forward, a scowl on his face as he glanced away from Izuku and to Shouta. What? He scoffed, frowning at the man. Tenya had to physically fight the urge to reprimand the boy for his rude behavior. Shouta ignored the boy's brash demeanor and continued on as if nothing had been amiss. You finished at the top of the practical exams, correct? He asked. Katsuki smirked, a look of pride replacing his scowl. Yeah, what of it? He replied, arrogance clear in his tone. In junior high, what was your best result of the softball throw? He asked. He blinked lazily at the boy in front of him as he awaited a response. 67 meters, he replied, looking to the softball in the man's hand. Do I get to fuck some shit up with my quirk? He wondered. Hell yeah. Shouta threw him the ball and he caught it with ease, turning it over in his hand. Stand in that circle over there, he directed, and Katsuki did as told, going to stand within the painted lines drawn on the field. Use your quirk to throw the ball as far as possible. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay within the circle. A wicked grin split across Katsuki's face. He pulled the arm holding the ball back menacingly and readied an explosion. Die! He yelled as he launched it into the air with a blast from his hand. The ball sailed through the air, disappearing from their sight as Katsuki turned to Shouta with a smirk on his face. Meanwhile, the class looked on in stunned silence. Die! One of the girls muttered in horror. Heroes must confront challenges and test their limits. Shouta held up the small device he'd been holding, showing an astounding 705.2. Know your maximum. That is the only way to become a hero. The shock wore off as the class burst out into excited chattering. 700 meters, whoa. One of the students muttered, impressed. This looks so fun, I can't wait for my turn. The pink girl from earlier exclaimed as she held her hands together excitedly. At that, Shouta scoffed, drawing the class attention. Fun, you say? He retorted coolly. If you're not going to take this seriously, then you're clearly not cut out to be a hero. His gaze hardened as the girl shrunk in on herself, looking slightly terrified. Here's something fun for you. The person with the lowest score on all the tests combined will be expelled immediately following the exam. Is that fun enough for you? He drawled. The class gasped, unable to believe what they were hearing. But sir, everyone has worked so hard to get here. You can't possibly take this opportunity away from us over such a trivial comment. An invisible girl cried out indignantly. Shouta merely shook his head. As I said previously, I will not hesitate to expel anyone I deem to have no potential. He reiterated sternly. If you have a problem with my teaching methods, you can pack your things and leave by your own volition. But there is nothing more to be said, Hagakure, Shouta stated flatly. If you're done complaining, we will begin with the 50-meter dash. And with that, the class fell into a tense silence as they prepared to start their tests. Izuku could feel a myriad of emotions coming from his peers: determination, fear, hopelessness. He glanced to the purple-haired teen worriedly, noting that his feelings were the strongest. There was only one thing he could do. Surely Shouta wouldn't expel his own foster son, especially with the principal having shown a fondness for him and being in his favor. Then again, today I've come to witness a completely different version of the man I thought I knew. Even so, his eyes showed with determination as his features set in resolve. That's right, I will fail every test. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share, and do comments.